Alright, a tier 3 pet is a pet with garbage stats and moveset. An example would be Tyler Grondin, who's really slow. Speed's incredibly important in PvP pet battles because it determines who goes first. And his moveset isn't very impressive either, so you're not going to see him very often in the PvP queue, and when you do, he's not going to do very well. A tier 2 pet is a pet that doesn't do half bad, but also isn't the best either. An example would be the Harbinger of Flame. He has decent self-synergy because he is a humanoid with a dot. It's called Immolate, and that also has good synergy with his Conflagrate, so you can throw out a dot, and then you can heal on the back line with your humanoid racial, or you can deal extra damage with Conflagrate, and he has good attack power, so on paper he does pretty well, and in PvE he doesn't do half bad, but in PvP he doesn't do the best because he's incredibly slow, so he's almost always going to go second, so a lot of the time your big hitting attacks are just going to be dodged. And then a tier 1 pet is a pet that does either really well on its own or has good synergy with other strong pets and is going to be seen a lot in the meta because of that. And a tier 0 pet is a pet that just needs to be nerfed. It's the best of the best. And an example of a tier 0 pet would be the Terraclaw Hatchling back in Legion when it had both dodge and Nature's Ward and was all you would ever queue into in the meta. So this is going to be my list of all the tier 1 pets in battle for Azeroth, as well as some honorable mentions that didn't quite make the cut, but I would consider a little bit better than tier 2 status. First up, we have Humanoid, starting with Speed breed or Eater. The advantage to the Speed breed is at 341 speed, he is going to go first more often than not, and as long as you're faster, you can effectively get 3 rounds of uptime out of your Shell Armor ability. Shell Armor will block 204 damage from every attack, and synergizes very well with his Body Slam. Body Slam is a 1-round cooldown that deals a bunch of humanoid damage, at the drawback of having some recoil damage directed back to you, but as long as you have Shell Armor up, that will soak up all of the recoil damage, so you can basically just use Body Slam with impunity. He also has a 4-round duration dot that is spammable called Acid Touch, and it doesn't deal very much damage, but it synergizes very well with his racial, because as long as you have the dot up, you can just swap to the back line, and your humanoid racial will heal you up as long as the dot is dealing damage. He used to be tier 0 back when he was introduced in Warlords of Draenor, and his ability Shell Armor had a 3-round duration, 5-round cooldown. Now it still has a 5-round cooldown, but it was nerfed to 2 rounds, but like I said, as long as you're faster, you can still effectively get 3 rounds of uptime out of it, so he's still tier 1, very tanky, difficult to kill. The only problem you'll run into with him is his attack power is pretty low, so he is going to have trouble landing kills sometimes, but he's just a really good tank, so as long as you pair him up with a hard hitter like the Iron Starlet or a Purple Puffer or something like that, he is going to perform very well. Up next is the Fiendish Imp. He is easily one of the top 5 pets in the meta right now, I would say. He's always been good, but especially now that Haunt's been nerfed, his main enemy was the Wicked Soul, because the Wicked Soul was faster than him. The Wicked Soul could throw out Haunt, and that would deal a bunch of damage to you, so since that was pretty much all you would queue into, the Fiendish Imp was kind of kept at bay back in Legion, but now that Haunt's been nerfed, you don't run into the Wicked Soul almost ever at all, and when you do, it doesn't do anywhere near as well as it used to. The way that Haunt is working now, the way it's been nerfed, is if you use it at full health, you will come back to life later on with half health. If you use it at half health, if you use Haunt at half health, you'll come back to life with 25% health and so forth. So you basically just lose half of the health that you had remaining whenever you used Haunt, whenever you come back to life later on. So because of that nerf, which isn't shown in the tooltip unfortunately, but you just kind of have to know it, I guess. Because of that nerf, you don't really run into Haunt uses very often, and so the Fiendish Imp is better than ever. You want to run the speed again with this guy. The advantage being that as long as you're faster, you can interrupt your opponent with Nethergate, as well as swap them out into their next pet. So if you have a bad matchup, you can just swap them out into somebody else, as well as interrupting their turn and getting some free damage out of it. And what also makes the Fiendish Imp so good is his ability Immolation. Immolation is a 9-round dot, and the way it works is you just throw it up on yourself, and then whether you're on the front or the back line, it will deal damage, as well as passively break decoys and bubbles and chill storms, which makes it very good for PvP. But the real advantage to the Fiendish Imp having Immolation is he is a humanoid, so as long as he's dealing damage with Immolation, even if he's on the back line, he will heal up with his humanoid racial. So he's very tanky, very difficult to kill, and pretty much works well with all teams except Sandstorm teams, because Sandstorm will block his Immolation. Sandstorm is one of the best ways to counter the Fiendish Imp, so the Anubis Half Idol isn't a bad counter to him, to be honest, especially if you can predict when they use Nethergate and Deflection it. But unless you have Sandstorm or Shell Shield or something like that, there's really nothing you can do about the Imp's Immolation, and he's just going to heal up for a bunch with his Humanoid Racial on the back line where you can't even hit him. Up next is Wormy Tunkins, as well as the Alliance Enthusiast and the Horde Fanatic, and all three of these pets work exactly the same way. They're all tier 1 for their ability Jar of Smelly Liquid. Jar of Smelly Liquid is super overpowered. It works like Weakness, where it hits almost as hard as a basic attack, has a 1-round cooldown, and will reduce the enemy's speed and damage done by 50% for an entire turn. So if you're going first, it will basically give you 100% uptime on 50% damage mitigation, which makes you incredibly tanky. It's very difficult to kill Wormy Tunkins if you're slower than him, even if you have undead damage. So if you pair him with a pet like the Alpine Foxling, who has Dazzling Dance, or the Infinite Hatchling, who has Temporal Anomaly, and you can make your Wormy Tunkins be faster, you're going to be incredibly tanky and very difficult to kill. Additionally, he is really good at dishing out lots of damage with his hard-hitting Burp, which applies a dot, and that dot synergizes well with Corrosion, because Corrosion adds 77 damage to every attack, including dots. So you can just basically use Jar of Smelly Liquid on cooldown, use Burp on cooldown, and then your filler ability is Corrosion. And so he's just really difficult to kill, in addition to dishing out lots of damage. Very strong tier 1 pet, especially when paired with a speed buff like Dazzling Dance. Up next we have the Curious Wolvar Pup. He's a very powerful pet because of his ability Snap Trap. Snap Trap and Magma Trap are the only trap abilities in the game, but they're really powerful in PvP because of their unpredictability. The way it works is you throw down a Snap Trap, it works as an item, so it can be removed by abilities such as Magma Wave or Consume Magic, but whenever they are removed, or whenever it activates, which is randomly, it has about a 10% chance for 9 rounds every round, to go off. Whenever it goes off, it will instantly stun the enemy, and they will also be stunned on the next turn. So they basically lose 2 turns. They will be interrupted for that turn, as well as stunned on the next. So it's very difficult to counter because it's unpredictable. It just has a 10% chance to go off for 9 turns, and unless they have a critter or Arcane Winds, they're going to get stunned. There's nothing they can do about it. He also hits really hard, so his Maul is really good, and when paired with a Bleeder, it's going to hit for a crap ton of damage. And even if you don't run him with a Bleeder, Whirlwind is a very solid AoE ability on a 3-round cooldown that does humanoid damage, which is strong versus dragons, so he's a very good pet versus Twilight Clutch Sister if you're running into a lot of those. And he can also run Punch to have strong damage versus the Twilight Clutch Sister. And he has good damage diversity, because if you're running Whirlwind or Punch, you are going to be weak to beasts, but your Snap Trap is mechanical damage, so that's going to be strong versus beasts. So countering him is pretty difficult. His one weakness is he is really slow, but he has such good attack power that his Snap Trap really makes up for his speed, and you can win a lot of games that you should otherwise lose just because of your Snap Trap going off at a good time. Pretty much the only thing you can do to counter Snap Trap if you don't have a critter or Arcane Winds is use Dodge and then hope that it goes off while you already have Dodge up. If you try to use Dodge and it goes off on the same turn that you use Dodge, it will interrupt you and you won't be able to get your Dodge off. So you have to just hope, pray to RNGesus that the Snap Trap will go off while you already have Dodge up. The one thing that you can do to counter it is you can run Tricorn, who is a critter, and you can use Sniff Out to clean up the... It works just like clean up from the Enchanted Broom, and you can remove traps that way, and you won't be stunned since you are a critter, but Tricorn isn't that great of a pet. He's only tier 2, so you're not going to run into him very often. So Curious Wolvar Pup, very solid tier 1 pet. Up next is the Rebellious Imp, and he's particularly good where the Fiendish Imp might not be so good. In some situations, you're not generally going to run him with Nethergate. You're going to want to run Portal, and you're going to want the Power Breed. The advantage of the Power Breed being if you're queuing into a lot of Sandstorms or Shell Shields that would normally block the immolation from the Speed Fiendish Imp. The Rebellious Imp has 341 attack power, so his immolation does 90 damage every round. And so even power pets like the Shore Butterfly who have Sandstorm, their Sandstorm will only block, say, about 82 damage for the Shore Butterfly, but immolation does 90. So even though it does block most of the damage, you are still going to be able to heal up with your humanoid racial if you're playing with the Rebellious Imp. So he's really difficult to counter, hits like a truck, and the playstyle is generally you just run Burn, Immolation, and Portal, and so you can throw up your Immolation, Portal to dodge the attack, and to swap to the backline, swap in your highest health pet, and just let your Immolation do its work. So Rebellious Imp is situationally better than the Fiendish Imp, but generally Fiendish Imp, I would say, is a little bit better just because he is going to be able to mess with your opponent's strategy using Nethergate. Up next is Mercolot, and he is tier 0, primarily because of his ability Righteous Inspiration. He's the only pet with this ability, and the way Righteous Inspiration works, it says that it just inspires a friendly pet to swap into battle, but to my knowledge that is worded incorrectly. The way it works is it will always swap in your highest health pet. I have seen a couple times where it didn't do that, so maybe it just swaps in your next pet, kind of like Nethergate, but for yourself. But the way it works is it will always go first, and it will give the pet that it swaps in a 100% damage buff as well as a 100% speed buff. So if you try to wait until they use the Righteous Inspiration and then you try to blinding poison them or clobber them to stun them, it's not going to work because they have a 100% speed buff. So countering Righteous Inspiration is incredibly difficult. Generally the strategy is to pair it with a pet like the Blackfuse Bombling who has Armageddon, or the Twilight Clutch Sister who has Twilight Meteorite, and then you'll use Righteous Inspiration to swap into one of those two pets and then just use their strong AoE to deal double damage. And countering it, like I said, is very difficult, especially if you're pairing it with an AoE pet, because generally what you can do to counter if it's like a one-shot, like Righteous Inspiration plus the Autumnal Sproutling's Fist of the Forest, which does 1380 damage when combined with Righteous Inspiration, is you can use Ethereal, and Ethereal will go first. It will dodge the attack, but if they're using AoE, then you can only dodge the pet on your front line with Ethereal, so your only option is to use Smoke Bomb, and Smoke Bomb is very uncommon in PvP. The only two pets that even have it are the Sneaky Marmot, which isn't a bad pet, but also you just don't use it that often. You don't see it very often, and the Young Mutant War Turtle, which is really not the best pet in the world. Those are the only two pets with Smoke Bomb. So countering Righteous Inspiration, basically the only good way to do it is to either use Smoke Bomb or to predict exactly whenever they are using Righteous Inspiration and use your cooldown, whether it's Blinding Poison, Clobber, or even Nethergate, to swap them out, stun them, or blind them. But you do have to predict the exact turn that they use Righteous Inspiration, because like I said, if you wait until they use it, then the pet that swapped in is going to have a 100% speed buff, and they're going to go first, so you're not going to be able to do anything about it. Additionally, he does have a spammable decoy breaker and bubble breaker called Blessed Hammer. It doesn't say it in the tooltip, but it does its damage in 3 chunks, just like Alert or Plot Twist. So it will go right through decoys and bubbles. And the downside is if you queue into somebody who's running Shell Shield, it's not going to deal very much damage, obviously, because it does its damage in 3 different increments. But spammable decoy breaker is really good. And he has really hard-hitting single attack called Falling Murloc. It's basically Ghostly Bite on a 4-round cooldown, but it does humanoid damage, so that's good versus the Twilight Clutch Sister if they don't dodge it. And also, if you have Mercolot as your only pet remaining, you can do a really good one-shot by Righteous Inspiration, which will buff yourself if you're the only pet left, and then Falling Murloc for, like, I think almost 1,300 damage. A little over 1,300 damage, yeah. It does a little over 1,300 damage, so that's a really solid one-shot for cleaning up pets. Just a really, really overpowered pet. And even if you don't want to run Righteous Inspiration, you can still run Shield Storm, which isn't quite as good, but it's still a really good ability. Nothing wrong with Shield Storm. And it says it lasts for 8 rounds, but to my knowledge, it actually just lasts forever. You have to hit all 3 pets that have Shield Storm for the Shield Storm to be gone. So better than Refuge by a long shot, because it applies to all pets, not just critters, and it doesn't actually have a duration. It's just an infinite shield that blocks a single attack on all 3 of your pets. But Righteous Inspiration is definitely the reason to get this pet. Up next we have the Anubisath Idol, and he's a very noob-friendly pet that will win games very easily without much skill. He has a lot of health, so his humanoid racial heals him up for a lot whenever he deals damage. He has deflection, so he can block incoming nukes. If you say you see an Iron Starlet using a wind-up and then a supercharge, you can just deflection and dodge all of the damage from it. You can also use that for Curse of Doom. If you get Curse of Doom thrown on your Anubisath Idol, you can just wait until it has 1 turn remaining and then just use deflection, and you will dodge all of the damage from Curse of Doom. So nukes are very ineffective against the Anubisath Idol because of deflection, and dots are very ineffective against the Anubisath Idol because of his Sandstorm ability, which blocks 74 damage from every attack, as well as causing everybody to have a 10% chance to miss, which is just really aggravating. Just RNG. So you can randomly miss any attack under Sandstorm unless you're an elemental, and all of your dots are going to do almost no almost no damage. Sandstorm's also really effective against AoE because it blocks 74 from every attack, so split damage like AoE is going to deal quite a bit less damage. So basically blocking 74 times 3 if you have 3 pets left from every single AoE attack. So yeah, very low skill, easy win pet. That's good against a lot of pets in the meta. Up next is Squirky, and he's actually a pretty good counter to the Anubisath Idol. He does pretty well 1v1, and he's just a really solid pet, especially if you pair him with a Dazzling Dance user or a Temporal Anomaly, because at 292 speed, he isn't the fastest pet in the world, but if he is faster, he can really take advantage of his stun, which is just a 5-round cooldown. It'll stun the enemy. Really solid pet. And he also has Bubble, which will block 2 attacks, and has no duration. It's just going to last forever. So what you can do is you can throw up Bubble, swap to the back line, and then later on, if you see that somebody's about to hit you with a really hard-hitting nuke, you can just swap Squirky right back in, and he'll still have Bubble up so that you can block whatever attack they were going to hit you with. So he's very difficult to kill, and he's just especially good against annoying healers that are elementals because of his aquatic spammable that hits pretty hard. So really solid pet, especially when paired with a speed modifier. Up next is the Karaji Guardling, and he's kind of the poor man's Anubisath Idol, but situationally he can do better because rather than having deflection, he has Blackout Kick, which works just like Squirky's Clobber. It's a 5-round cooldown stun, stuns the target for 1 round, and it generally works better if you are faster, so you're going to want to run the speed breed of the Karaji Guardling, although there's nothing wrong with the power or the HH breed. It's just speed's going to be able to take advantage of that Blackout Kick more often than the other breeds. And just like the Idol, you're going to want to run Crush and Sandstorm. Sandstorm being so good against AoE and dots, and Karaji Guardling just works really well on Sandstorm teams. Very solid tier 1 pet. Last one I want to mention is the Sporling Sprout, and for the Sporling Sprout, again, you can run Power or HH, nothing wrong with those breeds, but the best breed is the Speed breed because of his ability Crouch. If you go first, it lasts for 3 rounds, but if you go first, that'll effectively give you 4 rounds of uptime on 50% damage mitigation on a 4-round cooldown, so they're only really going to be able to hit you for 1 turn before it comes back off cooldown, while you don't have 50% damage reduction. So he's incredibly tanky, and Crouch, when combined with his ability Leech Seed, makes him incredibly difficult to kill. Leech Seed is just a 2-round dot that heals the user and also deals some minor dot damage.
but it synergizes well with his humanoid racial, because in addition to his humanoid racial, it also heals every time it deals damage, which is for 2 turns. So solid ability, nothing overpowered or anything, but it just pairs very well with his crouch ability. And you'll generally, especially on the speed breed, you'll just run jab, which is really good versus the Twilight Clutch Sister. So he's very good versus Twilight Clutch Sister because he can crouch that huge nuke and just deal strong damage versus dragons. So very good tier 1 pet, super tanky, and he'll pair especially well in teams like Moonlight teams. Next I have some honorable mentions that I consider to be somewhat better than your average tier 2 pet, but a cut below the other tier 1 pets on this list for whatever reason. First up I have the Flare Youngling. Generally you're going to want the speed breed of this guy, because if you're faster, then Blitz will deal extra damage, and Kick will interrupt your enemy and basically give you free damage on a 3-turn cooldown. He also has Deflection, which is a solid pet in PvP. You could run Focus to give yourself a speed buff. It also buffs your hit and critical strike chance, but that's less important. But you're generally going to want to run Blitz, Deflection, and Kick. The only problem with this moveset, which is generally what you want to run, is you only have 1 school of damage, so if you're queuing into beasts, he isn't going to hit very hard, and he also just doesn't have very hard-hitting cooldowns or anything unless you run Rampage, and even that isn't the hardest hitting ability, especially on the speed breed. So not the best pet in the world, but situationally he can do very well, especially against the Twilight Clutch Sister. Like I said though, if you're queuing into beasts, which are generally going to be paired with the Twilight Clutch Sister since they take weak damage from humanoid attacks, those beasts are going to soak up your humanoid damage quite easily, and your Flare Youngling isn't going to do very well. Also, if he is outsped, he's kind of like the Scalded Basilisk Hatchling. He's basically worthless. So when he's faster, he's really good, and when he's not faster, he's basically worthless. So solid pet, but not the best. Next I have Crusher, who is generally going to be the power breed. Since he has 333 attack power, he hits really hard, but there's nothing wrong with the other breeds. The HH is super tanky, HP is also really tanky, but can dish out good damage, and then the power speed breed is an odd choice because it's only 273 speed. It's still probably going to be slower than most pets out there, but he's a lesser version of the Orator just because he is quite a bit slower. He can't take advantage of shell armor since he's going to go second most of the time, but his shell armor does block more damage per attack. So situationally he might do a little better since he can hit harder. You're going to generally run the same moveset, Acid Touch, Shell Armor, and Body Slam with this guy. I just don't think he's quite as good as the Orator since he can't really take advantage of his speed, obviously, with Shell Armor. Next I have the Rotten Little Helper, who is the hardest hitting Minefield user in the game. He has 333 attack power, so his Minefield hits for 706 mechanical damage. That's really hard, and the way Minefield works, it's called Booby Trap Presence for the Rotten Little Helper, but the way Minefield works is whenever your enemy swaps in a pet, or you use Nethergate to swap them out, or they have a pet die and then they have to bring in another pet, as long as you have Booby Trap Presence or Minefield out, they're going to activate the Minefield, and it's going to instantly deal 706 mechanical damage to them, which is really good. He also has Grinch's Gift, which also does 706 mechanical damage, so he's really good against beasts, but the one problem that you'll run into with this guy is he's really slow. He only has 260 speed, so that's why I don't really consider him to be a solid tier 1 pet, but he's definitely an honorable mention that I'd like to throw out there. And you could also run Ice Lance and Call Blizzard instead of Grinch's Gift, and you could use Ice Lance as a decoy breaker, fun fact. As long as they're not an elemental, they will be chilled by Call Blizzard. So, not a bad pet, definitely, but not the fastest one out there, so that's the real downside to him. Next up, I have Legionnaire Murky as well as Knight Captain Murky. They basically have the same moveset. You're going to want to run for the Horde, Whirlwind, and Shield Storm. Shield Storm is a really good ability. It just throws a shield onto all of your pets, and until they take an attack, they're going to have that shield for perpetuity. Then you have Whirlwind, which is a solid AoE, and it does extra damage if you throw up for the Horde first, which is only a 1-round cooldown that deals a basic attack's worth of damage.
and then buffs your entire team's damage by 25%. So really solid ability when you pair it with pets like the Twilight Clutch Sister. Their Twilight Meteorite's going to hit extra hard, while For the Horde is out. If you have Immolation rolling, that Immolation is going to hit for 25% extra damage. You get the idea. All attacks deal 25% extra damage. So For the Horde's a really good ability. For the Alliance is the Night Captain Murky version. So whichever pet you have, it's called either For the Horde or For the Alliance. And he's a really solid pet. The only downside to him is, again, his speed. He's not very fast, so he's going to be outsped by most pets, so they can take advantage of that. But definitely worth mentioning. He is really good. Next up, I have the Corefire Imp. He's the lesser version of the Rebellious and the Fiendish Imp. Not quite as hard-hitting as the Rebellious Imp, and not as fast as the Fiendish Imp, obviously. But he is an Imp with Immolation nonetheless, so he's really good. You can just throw up that dot, swap to the back line, and heal with his Humanoid Racial. He also has Wild Magic, which synergizes very well with dots like Immolation. And you can also choose Cauterize instead, which is a really solid heal. And so he's just a really solid tier 1 pet. I just don't consider him as good as the other imps, so I wanted to give him an honorable mention rather than putting him on the same status as them. Next I have Bonkers, and generally you're going to want to run Jab because that's good versus dragons, but you can run Bite for damage diversity if you want. The only problem with Bite is it does a solid 280 damage with the speed breed of Bonkers anyways. So you don't have that chance to hit a little bit harder, which generally pays off. Having that that range of damage generally is going to do better. So I like to run Jab. You have Dodge, which is why you want to run the speed breed. If you go first, you can actually dodge for 2 turns. And then you have Tornado Punch, which works just like Soul Rush, except it's humanoid damage, so it's really good against the Twilight Clutch Sister. You could also run Haymaker if you have a way to buff your hit chance, and Michael Leo has an awesome team that I totally stole for this video, with the Royal Peachick as your Rain Dance user, and then you can use that with Haymaker for an extra chance to crit, and also a 100% chance to land that Haymaker for lots of damage. So definitely a fun pet, but not quite as good as, say, the Fiendish Imp or the Anubisath Idol. Situationally, he can do better, though, than some of them, because he is faster than the Idol. He's just a really solid pet, but not the best in the world generally. If you're running Jab and Tornado Punch, he only has 1 school of damage, just like the Flayer Youngling, so if you're queuing into Beasts, he's not going to do as well. And if he is outsped, he'll do better than the Flayer Youngling will if he's outsped, but he kind of depends on going first since he does have Dodge. And at only 325 speed, he will be outsped by the fastest pets out there, like the Fiendish Imp and the Hermit Crab. Next is the Kunlai Runt. He has that classic combo with Frost Shock and Deep Freeze. You can also throw in a takedown so that if they stay in while they're stunned, you can deal extra damage. And he's just a solid pet. I don't really consider him to be quite as good as the other tier 1 pets, but he can definitely do well, especially if you leave him as a 1v1 pet. He will easily clean up most pets out there. Additionally, there is the Womper, who works a lot like the Kunlai Runt. He has, instead of Frost Shock, he has the ability Flash Freeze, which is a 3-round cooldown, 5-round slow, that will also chill the enemy. So while they're chilled, you can stun them with your Deep Freeze. And then he just has a spammable attack. He doesn't have Takedown to take advantage of the stun. So I don't actually have Womper yet, so I haven't gotten to try him out, but I would assume he does very well. He works a lot like the Kunlai Runt. So yeah, solid pet, both of them. Not quite tier 1 though in my book, but like I said, I haven't gotten to try Womper out, so he might be better than I think he is. Flash Freeze is definitely a really good ability, so I think it's situationally better than Frost Shock, because Frost Shock only lasts for 2 rounds as a slow. Next is the Hopling, and he's a speed version of the Feral Vermling. Really solid pet. He is a humanoid with a dot called Poison Lash. It's a 5-round dot. Could also run Sticky Goo, which is a lot of fun if, say, you're running a humanoid family familiar team, or family brawler, I think is what the achievement's called. You could run, say, Sticky Goo and then a Kunlai Runt, and then what you can do is you can root them, you can swap to your Kunlite Runt, you can Frost Shock, and they can't swap to avoid the deep freeze, so you can deep freeze, then they still have to stay in because they're still rooted, so you can get the guaranteed stun as well as the guaranteed double damage from takedown. It's a fun little combo that you can try out if you're trying to get that achievement done. But generally you're going to want to run the Hopling with the dot instead of Sticky Goo, just because you can take advantage of your humanoid racial. He also has Backflip, which works just like Kick from the Flayer Youngling, so if you go first, he's going to be able to get free damage and interrupt the enemy. And then he has Tongue Lash, so if you're queuing into undeads, he's one of the few humanoids who will do decently well against undeads, just because he can deal strong damage to them. Up next I have the Cold Light Surf Runner, who is a lesser version of Squirky. He does have Fish Slap and Clobber just like Squirky, and he's a little bit faster, so situationally he might be better than Squirky because he can go first with his Clobber. The only problem he runs into is he's basically locked into Whirlpool, since his other option for his third slot is Uncertainty, which is a garbage ability that reduces your accuracy by 25%. So you kind of have to run Whirlpool, and Whirlpool isn't necessarily a bad ability, but a lot of the time you are going to get it dodged since it does take 2 rounds to go off. Your enemy's generally just going to be able to predict when it's about to go off and use dodge or ethereal or something like that. However, if you're queuing into something like a Blossoming Ancient, the Cold Light Surf Runner will actually do better than Squirky because he can deal extra damage with Whirlpool versus Elementals. And not a bad pet, I just don't think he's quite as good as Squirky since he doesn't have Bubble available to him. And lastly, for honorable mentions on humanoids, I have Baby Winston, just for his ability Barrier Projector. Barrier Projector is basically an AoE version of Shell Armor. It reduces a crap ton of damage on only a 4-round cooldown for 2 rounds. So if they throw out a Twilight Meteorite while you have Barrier Projector up, it's going to do practically no damage to you, if any at all, as long as you have 3 pets remaining. He also has Mechanical Damage, which makes him really useful for Family Familiar, those kinds of achievements where it's PvE and you have to have humanoids that are strong versus beasts. Generally, humanoids are really weak versus beasts because of humanoid damage, so having Test the Cannon isn't a half-bad ability. And then Logic is a really good ability. That's just a 1-round cooldown that works just like Body Slam, except that it doesn't have the recoil damage back to you. So he has a good moveset. The only problem with him is he only has 260 speed, so he's going to get outsped by almost everything out there. And if you just use your Barrier Projector on cooldown, then they're usually just going to dodge or blinding poison you while you have that buff up, and then wait until your Barrier Projector is gone before they use their abilities. So situationally he can do pretty well, but he is really slow, so I don't consider him to be a solid tier 1 pet. Just he does have that one unique ability that's pretty useful against AoE. Up next I have Dragonkins, who typically have a bit of a disadvantage in PvP pet battles just because dragons generally deal weak damage to undeads and they take strong damage from humanoids. And the humanoid racial and the undead racial are 2 of the best in the game. Also, there are more tier 1 pets that are humanoids and undeads than any other family, just due to how good their racials are. Despite this disadvantage, however, there are a couple tier 1 dragons that I would like to mention, as well as some honorable mentions. First tier 1 dragon is the Bronze Whelpling. You have to run the speed breed of this guy because all 3 of his moves depend on him going first, or at least benefit from him going first. First has Arcane Slash, which deals extra damage if he goes first. He also has a stun called Crystal Prison, which will stun them, and if you go first, will interrupt their turn. And then they're going to be stunned the next turn, so they basically lose 2 turns if you're faster. And then you have Liftoff, which is really advantageous if you are going first, because if you're able to predict whenever they're about to hit you with a hard-hitting attack, you can just use Liftoff, you'll go up in the air and avoid their attack. So, solid pet, but definitely important that you have the correct breed. 325 speed Bronze Whelpling is the one to go with. Next up is the Twilight Clutch Sister, the infamous bad boy of Battle for Azeroth. He was good back in Legion, and he never got nerfed, so he's still good in Battle for Azeroth. He's good just because of his ability Twilight Meteorite, which is a 5-round cooldown Dragonkin version of Thunderbolt or Avalanche, except that unlike the Alteric Brewpup, who has exactly the same attack power, 289, as the Power Speed breed Twilight Clutch Sister, which is the breed to go with, by the way. Even though they have exactly the same attack power, and Avalanche and Twilight Meteor are basically just different damage types of exactly the same ability, Avalanche does 509 damage, and Twilight Meteorite does 772 damage. So it just for no reason whatsoever does extra damage, which is stupid. And he also is going to generally run Twilight Fire and Phase Shift. So he's going to have all cooldown based abilities. Cooldowns are overpowered in pet battles, so the way you play him is generally kind of like an old school Bone Serpent, where you'll just interweave your Twilight Fire in between your other two cooldowns. So you'll go Twilight Fire, Phase Shift, Twilight Fire, Twilight Meteorite, Twilight Fire, and then you'll be cooldown locked for a turn, so you'll have to swap. And generally you're going to want to pair the Twilight Clutch Sister up with another AoE pet, like, say, another Twilight Clutch Sister, and then a beast, like an Alpine Foxling. And that's actually one of the best teams in the game, is double Twilight Clutch Sister, Alpine Foxling. Really, really difficult to beat that team, because once the Twilight Clutch Sister is faster with Dazzling Dance, there's really not much you can do about it. It just does ridiculous amounts of damage, and it's super overpowered. Really annoying to queue into. Another option is just to queue with two beasts and a Twilight Clutch Sister, and that's really strong because the beasts take weak damage from the humanoid damage that is strong versus the Dragonkin, so pairing those with a Twilight Clutch Sister is really good. One of the best pets against the Twilight Clutch Sister is actually Twilight, just because he is just a little bit faster and he has really strong hard-hitting humanoid attacks. But he is a Darkness pet, and Darkness kind of trolly, so I don't like Twilight very much. He's definitely tier 1 though. And Twilight Clutch Sister is one of the best pets in the game, so having a counter for him is kind of mandatory. Up next is the Infinite Hatchling, who is one of the best Cyclone users in the game, and Cyclone on its own isn't the best ability ever, but it is a decoy breaker, and it becomes a really good ability if you pair the Infinite Hatchling with a pet like Poda, or Rain Dance user like the Jade Mist Dancer, or a Jungle Beak, or there's plenty of other pets like that. But a pet with Uncanny Luck like Poda or a Rain Dance user is going to be really effective with Cyclone, because you can throw out your Cyclone, swap to your Rain Dance user or your Uncanny Luck user, and throw up your hit chance buff, whichever one you chose, and it'll buff your Cyclone from 35% chance to 85% chance, which is going to hit most pets. And it does a bunch of AoE damage. He's a really good pet because of his Temporal Anomaly as well, which is a 3-round cooldown slow, AoE slow, so it'll slow all 3 of the enemy pets. It also acts as a decoy breaker, so if they have decoy out and they have 3 pets, it will break decoy instantly. It will block your Temporal Anomaly for the first 2 pets, unfortunately, but breaking decoy is always good. And he's just a really hard-hitting Cyclone user, so that's what makes him so good. He has 341 attack power, Temporal Anomaly super good, pairs very well with pets that kind of depend on going first but aren't the fastest in the world, so Infinite Hatchling plus Wormy Tumpkins is really good. Infinite Hatchling plus pretty much anything is really good, as long as you have a way to buff your Cyclone hit chance. A couple honorable mentions I have for dragons. We're going to include the Nether Fairy Dragon. You're going to want to run a speed breed of this guy, so that you can take advantage of going first with Evanescence, which is a 4-round cooldown dodge. You also have Moonfire and Arcane Blast, which synergize quite nicely together. Moonfire is going to change the weather to Moonlight, which buffs all magic damage by 10%, which is not bad. It also buffs healing by 25, so you have to be careful about that. If you're going up against a really healy team, it isn't the best thing to buff their healing, but Moonfire is one of my favorite. Moonlight's one of my favorite weather effects. I really like it. The one problem you're going to run into with the Nether Fairy Dragon is he doesn't have very much damage diversity. You're generally going to have to run this moveset, and so if you run into mechanicals, he's going to really suffer because he has all magic type damage. So that's the real downside to him. Also, if he's outsped, he can't really take advantage of his dodge, so a lot of the best pets out there, like the Hermit Crab and the Fiendish Imp, are going to outspeed him, so I don't really consider him a tier 1 pet, but he's definitely very solid if he is faster, so well worth mentioning. Next on the list, I have the Dream Whelpling and the Emerald Proto-Whelp, who are basically just reskins of each other. But the Dream Whelpling has Healing Flame available, while the Emerald Proto-Whelp does not. And I prefer Healing Flame just because Emerald Dream does have the downside of locking you into it for 3 rounds, kind of like a Stampede, except for a heal. And so your enemy's going to have 3 rounds of freedom to do whatever setup they want to, while you can't attack, and you're just sitting there healing. The plus is, if you are sitting in your Emerald Dream and they try to nethergate you out, it's not going to swap you out. So that's kind of nice, but you're slower than the Fiendish Imp, so unless they're dumb enough to go for a nethergate while you already have Emerald Dream going, and they just don't know better, then that's not really a very good counter. But it is something nice to know, is if you are sleeping with Emerald Dream, you are healing, then you are not swappable. You can't be swapped out. Just a little fun fact that you're probably aware of already if you got Stardust. It was a little bit of a trick that I used anyways to beat that guy. And you also have Emerald Presence and Emerald Bite, so you're a very good pet for double countering flyers because you are a dragon, so you take weak damage from their flying attacks and you deal strong magic damage. So very good tanky pets, both the Emerald Proto-Whelp and the Dream Whelpling. I kind of prefer the Dream Whelpling, but the Emerald Proto-Whelp isn't bad. You're generally going to want to run the Power breed, but the Power Speed breed is also good for both of these pets. Just not going to be outspeeding a whole lot with that 273, so that's why I would probably give a slight advantage to the Power breed, just because it's going to heal a little bit more, block a little more damage with Emerald Presence, and obviously hit harder. Next up, I have the Silver Dragonhawk Hatchling, who is my favorite Conflagrate user. Not the best pet in the game. Conflagrate isn't really the best strategy ever, but it's not a bad strategy either, and it is a lot of fun. And what makes him so good is his speed at 357. He does tie with rabbits, speed rabbits, so he's going to outspeed almost everything, and he can take advantage of that with his basic attack, which is Quills, which does more damage if you go first. He also has his own burn, either Flamethrower or Flame Breath, which is a really good way to synergize with Conflagrate. So you can either throw out Flamethrower, which is an area of effect, so even if they swap, they will still be counting as burning. And I also kind of like Flame Breath because if they take the dot and then swap to the back line, then now they're taking the dot on the back line, which is good, obviously. But I guess they can also avoid the extra damage from Conflagrate. Generally, it's just better for you, though, if they take the dot on the back line. So I like Flame Breath. I know Disco Doggy likes Flamethrower. I also like Flame Breath just for damage diversity, but you already have pretty good damage diversity since you already have Elemental as well as flying damage. So really solid pet, but he's a little bit squishy. No way to heal or reduce damage, so not the best pet in the world either, but a really fun pet for sure. And he does really well just because he's so fast. And the last honorable mention I'd like to talk about is Scaly, who isn't out yet as of recording this video, but based on his moveset, even if, regardless of whatever breed he has, he should be really good just because he has Rip and Toxic Bite. Toxic Bite works kind of like Black Claw, except it's kind of like Wild Magic, except that it only works for dots, so it enhances all dot damage by a little bit, and also has some upfront damage. So it's going to work really well when combined with Rip, and then you can either run Ancient Blessing or Fade. Both of those are equally solid abilities. I'd probably say that the best build will probably be Rip, Toxic Bite, and then Fade, especially if he has like a power breed. He should be really solid with that build. Pairing him with other bleed pets like the Curious Wolvar Pup, who has Maul, or maybe Snarly with Blood in the Water. I think he's going to be a really solid pet. I don't know if he's going to be tier 1 because I haven't gotten to try him out, obviously, but I'm really looking forward to Children's Week coming out so I can give him a shot. Up next I have Flyers, starting with the Terraclaw Hatchling. Back in Legion, he was tier 0 when he had Dodge and Nature's Ward available. Now you have to choose between one or the other. but a bird with Nature's Ward is really good, and a bird with Dodge is also really good. So I still think he's tier 1. I like to run him with Hawkeye, although Ravage is not a half bad ability, just for some damage diversity. And then you're still probably going to want to run Alpha Strike, since he is a bird. Alpha Strike's a really good ability, since you're going to go first a lot. And he's just really good. I think that Nature's Ward is probably better, just because a hot with a bird is overpowered. If you lose your flying racial, you can just throw up your Nature's Ward, swap to the back line, and heal back to past your racial. So he's still really good. It's just he's a little bit more balanced now that he doesn't have both Dodge and the Nature's Ward available. You have to choose between one or the other. Next up is the Orphan Fellbat. He's not as good as I used to think he was. I thought he would be tier 0. He just doesn't hit very hard, so that's his really only downside. But he does have really good synergy with a lot of the best pets out there, especially the Fiendish Imp, since he does have Black Claw. Black Claw works really well with dots like Immolation. And he happens to have his own dot, Fel Immolate, which is 4-round duration. And doesn't hit very hard, but with Black Claw it doesn't deal half bad damage. And then he has Drain Blood, which is really good. It heals for 300% of 10% of the enemy's maximum health, and also deals 10% of their maximum health and damage. So it doesn't hit very hard, but it heals for a bunch, especially under Sunny Day, if they have that weather out for you. Or if you want to run the Orphan Fellbat with your own Sunny Day team, that's not a half bad option. But like I said, he doesn't hit very hard, so if you're running a Sunny Day team, you might have trouble getting a kill, so it might not be the best option. He's really good though because of his breed. He has 325 speed, so even if he loses his flying racial, he's generally going to still be faster than the enemy, and he'll still be able to heal. If you want, you could run Paralyzing Venom. That isn't half bad, but he's not going to have the heal if you do that, so I generally would recommend Fel Immolate, Black Claw, and Drain Blood. Up next is the Shimmering Aquafly. You'll want to run the Power Speed breed of this guy. That's the best breed. You run Dodge, Healing Stream, and Alpha Strike, and he's basically the Terra Claw, especially when you combine him with an aquatic like the Hermit Crab. His Healing Stream is going to be really effective because it will heal 351 to you, as well as half of that to all of your aquatic allies. So your aquatic allies on the back line are going to get half of that heal. It's just a really good pet. He's a little bit faster than the Terra Claw, so 1v1 he will do better. And really his only downside is he only has Alpha Strike as his only attack. So that's weak versus Dragonkin, and the Twilight Clutch Sister is of course a dragon. So since there are so many of those, he does struggle versus that particular pet, but he's a really good pet nonetheless. As long as you pair him with a pet that has humanoid damage, you're going to do very well with the Shimmering Aquafly. Up next is the Direbeak Hatchling, who has Iron Skin. Iron Skin is basically shell armor, but on only a 4-round cooldown, so it's just better. It still lasts for 2 turns, and it reduces basically the same amount of damage, just scaled to your attack power, of course. So it will block a little bit more than the Speed Ore Eater's shell armor does. And it only has a 4-round cooldown, which is pretty good. He also has Falcosaur Swarm, which is a decoy breaker. It's kind of like Swarm or Flock, except it only lasts for 2 rounds, which is better, because it's not going to lock you in for as long. And then he has Predatory Strike, which is just a really hard-hitting single target nuke, which is really good with Falcosaur Swarm, because that basically means that if you hit them with Falcosaur Swarm for 2 turns, they're either going to get one shot with Predatory Strike, or they're going to have to swap. You could also run Warning Squawk. That isn't a half bad ability, but you're going to give up Predatory Strike for that. So generally the moveset you'll want is Falcosaur Swarm, Iron Skin, and then Predatory Strike. And he's basically tier 1 just for Iron Skin. Iron Skin is really, really good. Next is the Fel Afflicted Skyfin, who is really good. He's the best of the birds with Wing Buffet. There's a couple different versions of that ability. There's Wind Buffet and Wing Buffet, but they both work exactly the same way. They deal magic damage. It works just like Nethergate, and except that it swaps the opponent's lowest health into battle rather than simply swapping in whatever the next pet, whatever is their second slot pet. So that's the only difference between Nethergate and Wing and Wind Buffet.
But the Fell Afflicted Skyfin is better than the other two pets with Wing Buffet because he has Fell Immolate and Wild Magic, and he has a power breed, so that dot hits really hard, especially with Wild Magic, does a crap ton of dot damage, whereas the other two pets with Wing Buffet only have Wild Winds, which isn't as good of a dot, and also their breeds don't hit as hard. So there are some other Skyfins that have Wing Buffet and Wild Magic, but they don't hit as hard and their dot isn't as effective. So I consider Fell Afflicted Skyfin tier 1. I consider the Juvenile Skyfin and the HH Skyfin, whichever one that is. I consider both of them to be tier 2 pets, but the Fell Afflicted one is definitely tier 1. Next up is the Shore Butterfly, who is one of the best Cyclone users in the game. He has Wind Buffet, which is basically Wing Buffet, except that it has a 4-round cooldown, so it does basically the same thing, except it does flying damage, and it also swaps in the opponent's lowest health pet. So it works basically the same way. Flyers with swaps are really good because they're almost always going to go first, so there's really nothing you can do about it. He pairs very well with pets like the Warbot, who has Minefield, because you can force them to swap and eat the Minefield with your Wind Buffet. He also has Cyclone, which, like I said, with the Infinite Hatchling, works really well with pets like Coda, or Rain Dance users, like the Axebeak or the Jungle Beak, or the Jade Mist Dancer, pets like those. And he can either run Scratch or Peck. Both of those are really solid, spammable basic attacks. Or you could run Sandstorm and Cocoon Strike, which is not a half bad combo, especially with the power breed of the Shore Butterfly. That Sandstorm will block 82 damage from every attack, so that makes him really solid against dot and AoE cleaves. So either of those are good solid picks, and the power breed is definitely the best one of the Shore Butterfly. Nothing wrong with the other breeds, but the power breed hits like a truck, and still has 284 speed, which is really not bad at all for a power breed. He has very, very good stats. I really like the Shore Butterfly. He's incredibly good. Next is one of my all-time favorite Rain Dance users, the Royal Peachick. You can use him in several different kinds of teams. First of all, he has Arcane Storm, and he's one of the best pets with Arcane Storm. Since he is a flyer, he's going to be able to go first with it before they try to do anything about it. You can also choose Dazzling Dance, which is a really good ability, so he can choose one or the other, whichever works better with your other pets. Arcane Storm works really well with abilities like Falling Murloc or Ghostly Bite because it will let you use those abilities without stunning yourself. Dazzling Dance, on the other hand, is really good with pets that benefit from going first, so pets with stuns or with Nether Gates or with Jar of Smelly Liquid. Those kinds of abilities are going to really benefit from Dazzling Dance. And then you have Rain Dance, of course, or Feign Death. So generally what you'll do is if you want to run him without a Cyclone, you can just run Feign Death, and then you can run either Dazzling Dance or Arcane Storm. Lots of fun options there, or you can just use him as your Rain Dance user for your classic Clone Dance setup, using him as your Rain Dance user. Really a lot of fun options available with this Royal Peachick, and he's a very fun tier 1 pet to use. Next up is the Bloodbeak, the Jungle Beak, the Axebeak, and Crackers. All 4 of these pets have exactly the same moveset, and they all have a power breed, which is the breed you want to use for these pets. They're just going to work like your average Rain Dance user, where you have Cyclone thrown out from another pet, you bring in your Bloodbeak or your Jungle Beak, whichever it is, and you throw out Rain Dance, buff your Cyclone up to 85% hit chance, and then you also have the added benefit of Nocturnal Strike, which is normally a 50% hit chance, but after you throw up Rain Dance, it'll of course be a 100% hit chance, even if you don't have Darkness out. So he hits really hard, solid Rain Dance user for sure. The real disadvantage he has is he doesn't have any damage diversity, so if you're queuing into a dragon, your Clone Dance is already going to do weak damage to the dragon, and you have only flying attacks, so not the best Rain Dance user out there, but definitely not a bad pet either. Still solid tier 1 pet. and especially good for taking out pesky emperor crabs or aquatics that are giving you trouble. Up next are all of the darkness birds. All of the birds with Call Darkness and Nocturnal Strike are tier 1. Several of them have gotten stat nerfs, such as the crow, and I believe the Gilnean raven also was nerfed. Actually, no, I don't think it was, but I know the crow was nerfed, where now it has very low attack power and much higher speed, and that speed isn't all that useful, but situationally, having 357 speed isn't bad on a bird with Alpha Strike. You just don't hit it nearly as hard as you used to. But it was kind of odd of them to nerf the stats on the crow, because they left a lot of other birds that hit way harder than him with no stat nerfs. So pets like the long-eared owl and the fledgling warden owl are power breeds that have Call Darkness and Nocturnal Strike, and those still have exactly the same stats that they did back in Legion, even though the crow's been nerfed. So another pet that was nerfed was the Dread Hatchling. He now has more speed than he used to and significantly less attack power, so he isn't the hardest hitting Call Darkness Nocturnal Strike user anymore. But he's still a tier 1 pet. He's really good against birds because he has a spammable magic attack called Shadow Talon, and at 288 attack power, he still hits pretty hard with Call Darkness Nocturnal Strike. So there are 2 new pets that were added called the Shade Feather Hatchling. That's one of them. He has a speed balance breed with 289 speed, 289 attack power. Pretty low health, but he has Call Darkness and Nocturnal Strike, and then Peck, so he's a solid tier 1 pet just because of that combo. And then the Crimson Bat Pup is another new Call Darkness bird with Nocturnal Strike as well, so he is tier 1. He has incredibly low health, but pretty solid speed at 305, and then really good attack power at 297, so he hits pretty hard, and he's faster even if he loses his flying racial, and if you want, you can run Screech as your spammable. So if you're worried about being slower, you can still run Screech, which is a spammable slow, or you can just run Bite so that you have some nice damage diversity, and you can take out critters no problem. Both of these birds are tier 1 just because they have Call Darkness and Nocturnal Strike. It's a really powerful combo. I'm sure you've seen it work, but basically the synergy is you throw out Call Darkness, all pets except elementals are going to be counted as blinded, and then Nocturnal Strike has a 100% chance to hit if the enemy is blinded. The only thing that I would like to mention is I have seen Nocturnal Strike miss under Call Darkness while I was blinded by Blinding Poison from a Death Adder Hatchling. So it wasn't a... I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, oh no, it's probably Blinding Poison from an Autumnal Sproutling or something. No, it's definitely a Death Adder Hatchling, so... I was a little bit confused by that because I thought that Nocturnal Strike had a 100% chance to hit even if you were blinded by Blinding Poison, as long as the enemy is blinded by Call Darkness. But apparently I was wrong. I think that got changed at the beginning of Battle for Azeroth or something, because it never used to work that way as far as I know. So, one thing to know, just a little side note, but still, they're all tier 1. Crow, Fledgling Warden Owl, Long-Eared Owl, Northern Hawk Owl, Dread Hatchling, Gilnean Raven, Shade Feather Hatchling, Crimson Bat Pup, all of these Call Darkness Nocturnal Strike birds are tier 1. For honorable mention flyers, I'm going to start off with the Cobalt Raven. An argument could be made for him to be tier 1. The only downside I really see with him is he doesn't really have any defensives or healing, so he's a little bit squishy, but his moveset's a lot of fun and synergizes very well with some pets. He has Dazzling Dance. His Dazzling Dance is called Moon Dance, but it works just the same way. No cooldown, increases your team speed by 25% for 9 rounds. Really solid ability. He also has Moonfire, and so he synergizes very well with healing pets or pets with magic abilities or creeping fungus pets. And he has Quills, which benefits from you going first. So really solid moveset. He works really well with pets like Wormy Tunkins or pets with stuns that maybe aren't that fast, but once they have a 25% speed buff, become monsters. So he does really well with pets that have humanoid damage, since he is weak to Dragonkin.
Like I said, I just don't know if he's quite as good as some of these other flyers because he doesn't have any defensives, and so he's a little bit squishy. But an argument could definitely be made for him to be tier 1. I think that I'll have to try him out some more before I'm sure, but I definitely want to give him at least an honorable mention. Next up is Chi-Chi, hatchling of Chi-Chi, who is quite difficult to kill because he has a heal. It's called Tranquility, which is a 2-round hot. And if you swap out, it'll heal whichever pet you have on the front line, so that's kind of nice. He can combine that with Ethereal, so while he has his hot whirling, he can just Ethereal and dodge and heal while he's dodging, which is really good. And then he can either run Fire Quills or Alpha Strike, which deal extra damage if you go first. So, really solid pet. Not the best out there, but definitely not a bad one, and situationally he can do quite well. Up next is the Sharp Talon Hatchling, who is another Falcosaur Swarm pet. He also has Predatory Strike, so he has that combo that the Direbeak Hatchling has. Really quite a solid combo, and he also has Rip, which is a really good bleed. So you can throw the bleed on them, then you can throw out Falcosaur Swarm, and they're basically going to take double damage from that bleed, or they're going to have to swap and take the bleed on the back line. Either way, you win, you're doing great. And then after you throw out Falcosaur Swarm, you can hit them with Predatory Strike, and now they better swap or they're going to take double damage from that hard-hitting cooldown. So, very solid pet. He hits really hard with his 325 attack power. The one downside to him is he has no defensives, no healing, and he's really slow. So after he loses his flying racial, he's basically worthless. He's going to be outsped by pretty much everything. So that's the one big downside to him, is he's really slow. But he works really well in bleed teams, and he's a lot of fun, for sure. Just not quite as good as the Direbeak, because the Direbeak has Iron Skin, and the Sharp Talon has to choose between Rip or Wild Winds. Not that those are bad abilities, but Iron Skin is way better. Next up is the Korthik Swarmling. This is another pet where an argument could definitely be made for him to be tier 1. I just haven't gotten to try him out myself enough to find out, but he has only one breed. It's a power breed, and he is, as far as I know, the only bird with a stun. So that's really strong, because since he has a flying racial, he's going to go first more often than not, and so that's going to be really advantageous with his stun, Amber Prison. He also has Slicing Wind or Club, so Slicing Wind is RNG garbage, so you're kind of locked into using Club. But that's pretty cool, because flyers are typically weak against Dragonkin, so having Club is really good. It's a good, solid, spammable humanoid attack. And for your third slot, you can choose between Takedown or Impale. Either of these are good options. Takedown is really good if they stay in while they're stunned, because it does deal double damage if they are stunned. So as a cleanup pet, the Korthik Swarmling should do really well, because if they only have one pet left, they can't swap out after they're stunned, so they are forced to take that double damage from Takedown. On the other hand, if you want to run Impale for damage diversity, that isn't a half bad option. It's just a really hard-hitting 2-round cooldown that deals double damage if they're below 25% health. So it's basically an execute ability that does beast damage, so not a half bad ability. Either of those are good options. I haven't gotten to try him out yet, so I'm not sure if I would consider him tier 1 or just an honorable mention. But since I haven't gotten to try him out, I'm just going to leave him as an honorable mention. Definitely, though, he could be very well a tier 1 pet. And he's one of the new Raiding with Leashes pets, so go get him. Next up is the Golden Dawn Feather, which is a very healy pet. He has Sunny Day as well as Love Potion, which is a priority heal, so it'll always go first, even if you're slower, and that makes him really difficult to kill. He just has a spammable flying attack, Quills, I think. So, doesn't hit very hard, but he's just really annoying to kill, and he's a bird with a heal, so even if he loses his flying racial, he can still heal back up. Next up is the Parasitic Boarfly, who is another pet that I'm going to call an honorable mention, just because I haven't gotten to try him out yet, but I could definitely see him being a solid tier 1 pet. I just need to give him some games, see what kind of teams he does well on. He does have Flurry, which is a really good multi-hit attack. It's the only multi-hit attack that I know of, besides, obviously, Blessed Hammer, Plot Twist, and Alert that will break decoys. So unlike Flank or blitz or abilities like that, even if you are slower, every time you hit with Flurry, if they have a decoy or a bubble up, it will hit twice, and it will break the decoy or bubble instantly. So it's a really nice mechanic. It's what makes Flurry so good. He has Liftoff, which is a solid ability, especially on a flyer, because you're going to be going first, so you can dodge hard-hitting attacks. And then he has Drain Blood or Feed, which are both pretty solid heals. So, at least on paper, he looks really good. And he has a Power breed and a Power Speed breed, probably are the best two options available to him. So, I'm not sure which one I would necessarily recommend. Maybe the Power breed, just to hit a little bit harder. But nothing wrong with that extra speed. At 305 speed, he's going to outspeed some pets, just not all. Which is okay, because he is a flyer, so he's going to go first anyways, as long as he has his flying racial. And he does have a heal. He actually has two options for heals in his third slot, so even if he loses his flying racial, he can always heal back up later on. Definitely looks solid on paper. I'm going to have to see how he does, but since I haven't tried him out yet, I'm going to just give him an honorable mention and try him out in the future. And for the last honorable mention, I will give that to the Aquafly. He's basically just a different breed of the Shimmering Aquafly. He has the same moveset and everything, but he doesn't have a Power Speed breed available, so I think the Power Speed breed of the Shimmering Aquafly is better breed than, sorry, not the Aquafly, the Waterfly is the name of the pet that I'm giving the honorable mention to. He just has the same moveset with Dodge, Healing Stream, and Alpha Strike, so he does really well with aquatics, but he's just a lesser version of the Shimmering Aquafly who has the best breed. Up next we have Undead, starting with the Speed Wicked Soul. He has a couple of breeds available, but you definitely want to run the Speed breed because at 337 speed, he is just a little bit faster than the Fiendish Imp, who is one of the best pets in the game right now. So being able to outspeed him and deal strong undead damage to him is really good. It makes him a very good counter. And you always want to go speed as well, because Haunt is much better if you can go first, because you can use it to dodge incoming attacks and cooldowns, and not only will you avoid the attack that they were trying to hit you with if you haunt them first, but their ability will go on cooldown if it was a cooldown ability like Blinding Poison or Nethergate or Surge of Power, one of those kinds of abilities. So whenever you choose your next pet, then they're not going to be able to use their cooldown on you, which is really good. Haunt was a 0 cooldown ability when it was first introduced, and it could also be used when you were on your undead round. So that was really broken and it quickly got nerfed. So now it has a 4-round cooldown, and it doesn't say it in the text, but if you try to use it when you're on your undead turn, it will always miss. So it's a useless ability after you've been killed, but still really good before then. Additionally, it has been nerfed in the beginning of Battle for Azeroth, where it doesn't say it in the tooltip, but after you come back to life, you will come back to life with half of the health that you had when you used Haunt. So it does have a bit of a drawback, and if you use it on an aquatic or somebody with shell armor who can mitigate the damage, it's really going to hurt you more than it'll hurt them. So you want to be careful with it, but it's still a really good ability if you can go first, because you can use it to dodge attacks and to get a free swap into whichever pet you choose. So it's still a really good ability on the Speed Wicked Soul. He also has Haunting Song, which is a good AoE heal. And just a good solid pet all around. He used to be the best pet in the game, or one of them anyways, back in Legion, when Haunt didn't have the drawback of taking away half of your health. But now that he's been nerfed, you don't really see him so much, and that's why the Fiendish Imp is so good. Still a solid counter. Up next we have the Bone Serpent, and again you're going to want the Speed breed so that you can be faster than the Twilight Clutch Sister at 292 speed. You have Call Darkness, which deals strong damage to the Twilight Clutch Sister, and you have Bone Barrage, which is a decoy breaker. It doesn't say it, but it deals its damage in 3 different hits, as well as applying a dot that will break decoys. So generally the moveset you're going to run is Bone Barrage, Liftoff, and Call Darkness, and you can use Liftoff to tactically dodge abilities, especially if you're faster. So it's another reason why the Speed breed is really good. You could run Death and Decay if you want to have an extra decoy breaker, but there really is no reason to since you're running Bone Barrage already, and that's a really good decoy and bubble breaker. Up next we have the Blighthawk. The best breed for this pet right now is probably the HP breed, but I personally like the power speed breed. There are a couple times where the extra speed can come in handy, although I think that in general your best bet is going to be with the HP breed. And the HH isn't half bad either, but I think the HP and the PS because they hit the hardest. And Cyclone's a really good AoE ability that benefits from having a high attack powered pet using it. And the Blighthawk is probably the best Cyclone user in the game just because he is the only undead pet with Cyclone, and the undead ratio is really good. Cyclone works like a decoy breaker, so if you throw it out and then they throw out a decoy, and they have 2 or 3 pets remaining, it will instantly break the decoy, so it's really good. And like I said before, if you throw a Rain Dance or an Uncanny Luck user, it becomes a very good AoE cleave. Generally, you're going to want to run Infected Claw and Ghostly Bite so that you can deal with humanoids, and that's really good damage diversity because, of course, Cyclone's good against aquatics, which your other attacks are weak against. You could also run Consume Corpse for a heal, but generally the strategy is to throw out Cyclone, then use Ghostly Bite, and you'll be stunned, but that doesn't matter because you're going to swap into your Rain Dance or Lucky Dance or Uncanny Luck user anyways, so it's no big deal. Up next we have Blight Breath, who is pretty much a staple pet for any AoE team. He's really good. He has a decoy breaker with Acid Rain. As long as they have 2 or 3 pets remaining, it will break decoys. And it also buffs the damage from your Dreadful Breath. There's only a handful of pets that have both Acid Rain and Dreadful Breath, and that combo is really good for cleaving down AoE. And he also has very good damage diversity with Toxic Smoke to counter the beasts that are going to take weak damage from your Dreadful Breath. And he is a double counter to the Twilight Clutch Sisters since he takes weak damage from their Twilight Meteorite. Additionally, his Acid Rain will nerf the damage of the Twilight Fire by a whole turn, and he does extra damage to Dragonkins, so very powerful counter to the Twilight Clutch Sister. The only drawback is he doesn't have any breeds that are faster than Twilight Clutch Sister, but that doesn't really matter because he has really good attack power and health with the HP breed. Up next is the Fossilized Hatchling, who is the hardest hitting Bone Storm user in the game. Bone Storm is generally going to be an ability you want to use whenever they have 2 or 3 pets remaining. It's not all that good if there's only 1 pet because it does cost you 10% of your health to use it, and it hits about as hard as a basic attack to all of the pets on the enemy team. It doesn't do split damage the way Twilight Meteorite and Dreadful Breath and abilities like that deal damage, so it's not as effective against only 1 pet remaining, but it's still a really solid AoE ability, and he's just going to fit well with any AoE team. And it doesn't really matter that he takes 10% damage for the recoil damage from Bone Storm because he has a really good heal with Ancient Blessing. So generally what you can do is you can just start with your Fossilized Hatchling, throw out Bone Storm, then throw out an Ancient Blessing, swap, and then rinse and repeat a couple times to get several Bone Storms off for lots of AoE damage. Up next is the Frostwolf Ghost Pup, and he's a really good anti-AoE pet. I'd say he's probably the go-to, along with Stinker or a Highland Skunk. Skunks are okay, and Stinker has power breed, so his AoE heal, I think it's called Bleat, is a pretty solid choice for anti-AoE, but the Frostwolf Ghost Pup has a better racial with the undead racial, so he can come back to life and use Haunting Song, which won't have any downside from the 25% damage reduction that you do whenever you're on your undead racial. So it's a pretty solid ability. He also has Ghostly Bite to deal with humanoids and a hard-hitting Scratch to deal with undead, so he's very good against undead AoE cleaves. He's pretty much the go-to pet for that. A little bit slow, but that's really the only downside to him, and he is undead, so he doesn't really care about his speed because he can always just come back to life after he dies. Up next we have Rattlejaw. He is a balanced pet, which makes him not quite as good as some of these other pets, but he's a pretty solid AoE pet. He's really good for cleaning up because he has a 2-round AoE called Great Cleave. You could also run Bone Barrage, but generally you're going to want to run Great Cleave and then either Skull Toss or Empowering Strikes. And then you'll want him as a cleanup pet because generally you're going to run him with Consume Corpse, although Reanimate is also an option. It works a lot like Emerald Dream from the Emerald Whelpling, but it's on an 8-round cooldown. And instead of healing for a little bit the first turn and then a lot on the third turn, it just heals for a pretty beefy amount for 3 turns, kind of like Stone Form. So he's a pretty good pet, not the best out there, but definitely a solid pet to throw onto any AoE team. He generally will do well with any Cyclone Clone Dance team or just a basic AoE team. If you're going for your family brawler, he'll do pretty well if you pair him with, say, Blight Breath and then Fossilized Hatchling, something like that, just to deal a lot of AoE damage. Up next we have the Son of Seth, who is a very low health, low speed pet, but he has a lot of attack power. He doesn't really have any moves that take advantage of his power, but he is the only pet in the game with all heal-based abilities in 3 different slots. So he can either go Plague Blood or Absorbed. You generally are going to run Plague Blood and then just pair that with Immolation or build Turret or a Dot of some sort. You can run Touch of the Animus and Drain Blood for a ton of healing, and he's just really difficult to kill if you don't have a way to dodge his Drain Blood or to deal with his healing from Touch of the Animus stacked with Plague Blood, and then of course his 3-round cooldown Drain Blood heals for a crap ton. So he's really good at just pairing with other pets that benefit from getting heals, especially Dot Cleaves do really well with him. Although he isn't the best pet out there, he's definitely a lot of fun, and he can do pretty well when you pair him with multi-hit attacks like Flurry, or the Alteric Group Up has Call to Pack, or even some abilities like Falcasaur Swarm might do pretty well. Up next we have Widget the Departed, who is a very solid counter to the Twilight Clutch Sister because he is an undead with Call Darkness. He is faster than the Twilight Clutch Sister, and he'll go pretty well on any Darkness Nocturnal Strike team because he has Spectral Strike, which works just like Nocturnal Strike, except it does magic damage, so it's strong versus flyers, and as long as the enemy is blinded, which you can do with Call Darkness unless they're an elemental, it'll have a 100% hit chance, and then of course he benefits from his 325 speed by running Pounce, so a really solid pet to pair with any Darkness team. My first 2 honorable mention undeads are going to be the Unborn Valkyr and the Ghastly Kid. In the past, they were tier 1 solely based off of how good Haunt was, but now that Haunt's been nerfed so many times, I don't think that ability alone merits them tier 1 status. However, it is still good because it gives you a free swap as well as applying a hard-hitting dot, so I do want to mention them, but I'm also going to mention a couple downsides to Haunt, and these are why I think that the Unborn Valkyr and the Ghastly Kid are not as good as the Wicked Soul. First of all, because they're so slow, you're not generally going to be able to go first, so you can't use Haunt to tactically dodge abilities the way you can with the Wicked Soul's Haunt. And also, if, say, you have an Unborn Valkyr and you're going up against somebody with the Wicked Soul, and you both use your Haunt on exactly the same turn, the Wicked Soul's Haunt is going to go first. He's going to be counted as dead by the time you try to use your Haunt, and then your Haunt will obviously miss because he's dead, and your Unborn Valkyr will actually just flop over and die. It won't even activate its undead racial. It's just going to be dead, and it will stay dead for the rest of the game. It's not going to come back to life. So definitely something to be aware of. If you try to haunt a dead pet, your Haunter will instantly just kill itself and die. So it doesn't say that in the tooltip or anything, but it's something to be aware of. And that also happens if somebody uses Explode or Armageddon or Baneling Burst or anything that kills themselves on the same turn and they go first, your Haunt pet will instantly just die if you try to use Haunt into them. So it's definitely an important glitch to be aware of, and it's why the Wicked Soul is a lot better than the Unborn Valkyr and the Ghastly Kid. It's because the Wicked Soul is going to go first, so he doesn't generally have to worry about that. Additionally, if you try to use Haunt and somebody else uses Life Exchange on the same exact turn, you're just going to come right back to life, and your health will be equalized with the Life Exchange user, even if you go first. And your Haunt dot will still remain on them, I believe, but your Haunt will be on cooldown. So, definitely an interesting glitch that you're not going to run into very often, since Haunt isn't very prevalent in the meta, and Life Exchange is even less common. But just something to be aware of. It's kind of a cool little glitch for whatever reason. That's how it works. And more important glitch to be aware of is if you're running Haunt and a pet with a multi-hit attack, such as the Alpine Foxing with Flurry, and you Haunt the enemy and then you kill them, and the killing blow is either the second or the third hit of your multi-hit attack, like Flurry in this instance. If it's the second or the third hit of Flurry that kills them, your Haunt pet will not come back to life, even with half of the health that it had. It's just going to stay dead for the rest of the game, and it's just a very weird coding error that's currently still in the game. If they die from the first hit of Flurry, no problem, but if it's the second or the third hit of any multi-hit attack, that is the killing blow to a pet that has Haunt on them, the Haunt user will not come back to life, ever, for the rest of the game. So that kind of limits the pets that you can pair with them, and because of all those downsides to Haunt, it has a 4-round cooldown, it's useless whenever it's on your undead round. It's not usable as a dodge if you're slower. I don't really consider the Unborn Valk and the Ghastly Kid to be tier 1 anymore, but I could definitely understand somebody making an argument for them still being tier 1. I just don't really see them very often, and when I do, I don't often lose to them because Haunt isn't as good as it used to be back in its heyday. Up next I have Detective Ray, and I'm mentioning him just purely based off of he's a double counter to the Twilight Clutch Sister. He is just barely faster than the Twilight Clutch Sister, even with the power speed and the speed balance breed at 293 speed. And so he takes weak damage from the Twilight Meteorite, and he also deals strong damage to Dragonkin with his jab and kick if you choose that ability. Although he isn't the fastest pet in the world, so generally your moveset is going to be jab, and then Immolation, which breaks decoys, although he doesn't have the humanoid racial, so he can't abuse Immolation the way the Fiendish Imp and the Rebellious Imp and the Core Fire Imp can, where you can heal on the backline, but it's still a solid ability just because it's able to passively counter Decoy and Bubble and Shield Storm and those kinds of abilities. And then Flame Jet's going to generally be what you'll go with, although like I said, Kick isn't a half bad option, especially if you're running him with a Dazzling Dance user or some way to buff your speed. But if you're not confident you'll be able to go first, Flame Jet's just a solid ability. It deals a bunch of elemental damage, as well as having a 50% chance to apply a dot for 3 rounds. So he's a decent pet, but not the best out there. Still a fun pet for sure. And an argument could be made for him to be tier 1. I just don't think he's the best one out there. Up next I have the Fragment of Anger, who back in his heyday was a very solid tier 1 pet, basically just because of Spirit Fire Beam, which if you have 2 or 3 enemy pets and they use Decoy, will work as a decoy breaker, just like Bone Storm and Acid Rain, but the damage has been nerfed significantly. I believe it was nerfed by 50% at the end of Warlords of Draenor, because pretty much all you would queue into was Fragment of Anger, Mechanical Pandaren, Dragonling, and Graves, and they would just use their AoEs and then swap and just cleave your entire team down in like 8 turns with nothing but AoE. And it was super overpowered and broken, so Spirit Fire Beam, Grave Destruction, and Thunderbolt all received a nerf at the end of Warlords of Draenor because of how overpowered they were when combined together. But he's still a fairly decent pet. I don't think he's tier 1 anymore, but he's definitely a high tier 2 pet, and he'll fit in very nicely with any AoE cleave team. His Soul Rush has a 25% chance to stun, just like Bonkers' Tornado Punch, and he just has good damage diversity. If you run Seethe, then you'll be able to counter mechanicals, and you have good damage diversity. Otherwise, you'll be stuck with all flying or magic type abilities, which is good because it makes him a very strong counter to flyers, but generally you're going to want to run Seethe just to diversify your damage. Up next we have Zomstrak, who is a lesser version of the Twilight Clutch Sister. He has Cartonado, which is an aquatic version of Thunderbolt or Avalanche, except it does reasonable damage. It does 509 damage, which is much more in line with his attack power. You can run either Shell Shield or Rot. I personally prefer Rot because that can have a lot of fun synergy with critter type abilities like Flurry and Scratch and Flink. But it's not the best in PvP because all your opponent has to do after you apply Rot to them, if they see that you have a bunch of critter damage coming their way, all they have to do is just swap into another pet. But a fun fact is if they throw up Decoy while any of their pets have Rot on them, Rot actually counts as a decoy breaker. So it will block the application of the debuff from Rot, the decoy will, but it'll also eat up a charge of the decoy. So that's a fun fact, is if you apply Rot before somebody tries to decoy and then they decoy, it will passively eat up their decoy in 2 turns. So not a lot of people know that. It's a pretty fun way to deal with decoy if you don't have any other decoy breakers. And then he's just a solid undead because he has Infected Claw. That's good versus Fiendish Imps. His real drawback is he's really slow, and he has Carpnado, which does reasonable damage, unlike Twilight Meteorite. Although he does synergize very well with pets like the Jade Mist Dancer and Blight Breath, who can throw out Acid Rain and change the weather to Cleansing Rain, so that Carpnado will hit as hard as Twilight Meteorite under Cleansing Rain. Up next is Graves, who used to be basically tier 0 back in Warlords of Draenor. Like I said before, pairing him with the Mechanical Pandaren, Dragonling, and the Fragment of Anger equaled easy wins. But he's been nerfed in several different ways. First of all, you have to choose between Grave Destruction and Bone Storm. You can't have both like you used to. So generally the moveset you're going to want to run is Skull Toss, Grave Destruction, which is a decoy breaker, even if they only have one pet remaining. It just removes all objects on the battlefield, so it can destroy turrets, it can destroy cyclones, it can destroy decoys, all objects. It actually destroys Magma Trap and Curious Wolvar Pup's Snap Trap as well, but in destroying it, it will be stunned, so it is still nice to be able to remove the RNG for the next couple turns by just activating it whenever you want with Grave Destruction. So that's why I generally prefer Grave Destruction over Bone Storm, although Bone Storm isn't a half bad ability. It just doesn't hit quite as hard as the Fossilized Hatchling's Bone Storm, since his attack power isn't quite so high. And then generally you're going to want to run Consume Corpse. Clobber isn't particularly useful since Graves is incredibly slow. And he isn't the best pet out there, but he synergizes pretty well with other AoE teams, and you can run Graves plus Wicked Soul, and then that way you can Haunt, and then your Wicked Soul counts as dead, so you can use the corpse of it to consume corpse, which isn't the best combo in the world anymore now that the Wicked Soul does come back losing half of its life, but it's still a pretty fun combo to play around with. There's probably better consume corpse pets out there, but Graves is definitely a solid pet. He's a good cleanup pet. If you have 2 corpses to eat, you can heal for quite a bit, deal out lots of damage, although he only has undead damage, so that's another downside to him, is he doesn't have any damage diversity. Up next is the Ghost Maggot, who is probably my favorite Plague Blood user. Plague Blood pairs very well with abilities like Build Turret or Immolation, where it will heal them for a little bit every time they deal damage. It also works really well with dots. It's kind of a spammable version of the Son of Seth's Touch of the Animus, which just doesn't heal for quite as much. He also has good damage diversity with Chomp, which basically works like Scratch, except it has a damage range, and then Ghostly Bite, which just deals a lot of damage versus humanoids. You can actually run Survival, and that's kind of a fun move to run with him. I believe he is the only undead pet with Survival, or he's definitely one of the only ones. And if you use it on your undead round, you actually won't die after your undead round is over. You will still have that 1 health remaining, which is pretty fun, but it's a little bit gimmicky. It isn't the best in the world since AoE is so prevalent, but it is fun to know that if you use Survival on your undead round, you can actually stay alive after your undead round, but you won't get another undead round if you're wondering. So you only get 1 undead round, and then after that, if you die, you're dead. So Ghostly Bite's generally the way to go. I just really like the Ghost Maggot because he is an undead with Plague Blood, and that's a good fun ability, but he's not the hardest hitter in the game. Generally, you're going to be running the Speed breed, and he's just kind of a fun gimmick pet. Up next is the Spirit Crab. You're obviously going to want the HH breed for this guy. The HS breed isn't really going to be able to take advantage of its speed. It's only going to have 224 speed, so that's still really, really slow. So the HH breed has a crap ton of health, so he's very tanky, takes a really long time to kill, and he can actually use a couple of abilities to be even more tanky. You can run Shell Shield, which is a really good ability for blocking dots and Immolation. I prefer Rot, but that's just because it's fun. It's a good hard-hitting and dead move on a 3-round cooldown that, like I said, works as a decoy breaker if you're able to apply it before they try to throw out decoy, and also makes them take damage as if they were undead, so your critter attacks will deal extra damage to them, like if they were an undead. The flip side is if they take damage from Dragonkin type abilities, they're not going to take as much damage. So Dragonkin abilities aren't that common though, except for Twilight Meteorite. And then generally I like to run Amplify Magic. That pairs pretty nicely with Rot, although you can definitely run Snap, which is not half bad because generally undeads do badly against critters since critters deal extra damage to undeads. So having a strong beast attack is really not half bad. And then Surge is the go-to ability for him since Whirlpool's generally going to be dodged. Surge is really good for actually making him incredibly extra tanky because moves like Flurry, Alpha Strike, and Flank, those kinds of multi-hit attacks that depend on going first, aren't going to get the extra attack off if you are going first with Surge. And that works pretty nicely with him since he has such high attack power and health. Surge is not a half bad choice. So he's a really good pet. Not the best one out there, but a really solid undead pet for sure. Up next I have the Spectral Spinner. And he has a really good combo with Blinding Poison and Spectral Strike. You're able to blind them, and then if they're blinded, Spectral Strike has a 100% chance to hit. But he's one of those pets that looks better on paper than he actually turns out to do in practice. Because if they are blinded, a smart opponent is just going to swap out, and then your Spectral Strike only has a 50% chance to land unless the weather's darkness and they're not elemental. So he looks really good on paper, but he actually doesn't deal very much damage. You're kind of limited to the speed breed because that's what makes Blinding Poison useful. And even with the speed breed, he's only 325 speed, so if he's outsped, his Blinding Poison's basically worthless. And he's kind of a one-hit wonder. He has that fun little combo, but other than that, there's really nothing too great. So he does work well with Darkness teams, but that's kind of all he does well with, and there are just better pets out there with Spectral Strike, like Widget the Departed, in my personal opinion. He can be a really solid cleanup pet, though. Up next, I have the Blighted Squirrel and the Infected Squirrel. Blighted Squirrel is one of your go-to pets for bleed teams, which aren't the best in the meta, but they're definitely good. Dots are really solid in PvP, and bleeds are solid dots. So his combo is Wood Chipper plus Stampede. That deals a bunch of damage because they're going to take 100% damage buff from Stampede, or if they want to swap with Wood Chipper, now they're going to be taking that bleed on the back line. So kind of a catch-22 no matter what they do. It's a pretty good combo. And then he has Crouch, so he can generally throw up his Wood Chipper. He can crouch just to give them a turn to see if they're going to swap or if they're going to stay in. If they stay in, he can go for Stampede. If they swap, he can just go for another Wood Chipper because it has no cooldown, throw up another bleed, and then that just is going to allow him to generally pair very well with the Infested Bear Cub, who is another honorable mention I'm going to put here. The Infested Bear Cub is one of your go-to bleed pets since he has Maul, and he's one of the harder hitting pets with Maul. Also, he has the Undead Racial, so that alone is why I consider him better than most other Maul users. If he was just a beast pet, there wouldn't really be anything too special about him. He's not very fast, so you're not really going to be able to take advantage of Bash, although that's generally going to be what you'll go with anyways, just because Hibernate isn't all that good in PvP. And then he has Diseased Bite, which is good against humanoids, so that's always good to have good, strong undead damage. But the Blighted Squirrel, the Infected Squirrel, and the Infested Bear Cub are basically on this list just because of their undead racial. If they were critters or beasts, they really wouldn't be anything spectacular. Although the Infected Squirrel is really fun to put into Moonlight teams because he has Creeping Fungus and Stampede, so you can throw out Moonlight on, say, a Cobalt Raven. You can swap into your Infected Squirrel, throw out Creeping Fungus, then you can Stampede. They're going to take extra damage from Creeping Fungus because of Stampede plus the Moonlight, so that's a lot of fun. And then, of course, you can either run Consume or Corpse Explosion. I kind of like Consume, especially on a Moonlight team, because you get extra healing, although Corpse Explosion is probably the play generally. And for all three of these pets, the Blighted Squirrel, the Infected Squirrel, and the Infested Bear Cub, you're going to want the HP breeds. Those are definitely the best, although they're good with any breed. Last two pets I want to give an honorable mention to for undeads are the Restored Revenant, which I don't have yet, but he has a really good combo with his ability Roar of the Dead, which basically works just like Howl.
where it makes him take 100% damage from the next attack, which he can pair with Ghostly Bite. So that's a really good one-shot, similar to Chrominius's Howl plus Surge of Power, but he's an undead, so that's what makes him that much better. He also has Rabid Strike as a spammable basic attack, which isn't half bad if you're pairing it with like Immolation or Dots, or you could just run Bite, which is just like the Spirit Crab, good because it's strong versus critters. So critters are generally what give undeads trouble, so having a good strong beast type attack is really good, and his stats are just really good. He has 325 attack power with Ghostly Bite, and that makes him really good. Additionally, if you don't want to go for that gimmicky one-shot combo, you do have Bone Barrage, which acts as a decoy breaker, so he's definitely worth mentioning. I'm going to have to try him out to see if I think he's actually tier 1, or if he's just an honorable mention, but for now, since I don't have him yet, I'm just going to give him an honorable mention. And lastly, we have the Wayward Spirit. He's kind of a cousin to the Fragment of Anger, as he also has Spirit Fire Beam. And I really like his stats. He has 317 speed, which means he's going to outspeed a lot of pets out there. The same speed as the Jade Mist Dancer, who is a tier 1 pet for sure. He has 292 attack power, which is really not half bad considering he's so fast. And he has really low health, but that doesn't really matter since he's an undead. He has the undead racial. He can always just come back to life after he dies. And he also has Fade. So even if he is outsped, you can use Fade, which works just like Portal. Except I don't think it swaps. I think Portal swaps into the highest health pet, whereas Fade simply swaps into your second slot pet, whichever that is. So it's kind of like using Nethergate on yourself, except that you obviously, it's good because you don't take any damage and then you are able to avoid the attack. So generally, you can put them on AoE teams with Spirit Fire Beam, then you can Fade, use another AoE pet, or you can throw out Curse of Doom, and then you can use Fade. So definitely a really fun pet. I haven't gotten to try him out very much, but I think he could do very well, so I think he's worth an honorable mention on this list. Up next we have Critters, who have one of the weaker racials in the game. Situationally, it can be nice to be immune to stuns and interrupts, although their immunity to roots and sleeps isn't often going to be very useful. So I would personally like to see a buff to their racial, maybe grant them additional immunity to Nethergate, Wing Buffet, Wind Buffet, and swap out abilities like that. I think that would make them a little bit stronger. But even with their weak racial, there are a couple tier 1 pets, first being rabbits. You're always going to want to run the Speed Rabbit because all of their moves are going to benefit from going first. There are plenty of these, including the Alpine Hare, the Dust Bunny, Olive Tail Hare, Spring Rabbit. There's plenty of them. They all work exactly the same way. And you're going to run Flurry, Dodge, and Burrow for these guys. Flurry being a multi-hit attack that, unlike all other multi-hit attacks, will break Decoy. And fun fact is, even if you are slower, if your enemy throws out a Decoy or a Bubble or a Shield Storm, but specifically Bubble and Decoy, even if you're slower, your Flurry will automatically hit twice and break the Decoy or Bubble. So it's pretty useful to know, but generally the playstyle with rabbits is you run Dodge and Burrow, and you just survive for a really long time by using those abilities to dodge cooldowns, dodge hard-hitting attacks, and all of your abilities really benefit from going first, so you definitely want the speed breed for this guy. Also, we have the Dark Moon Rabbit, who works just about the same way, except he doesn't have Flurry, so he can't break decoys, unfortunately. But he can do pretty well on bleed teams, since of course he has bleed. You can just throw up his dodge, so if you bleed, you haven't taken any damage, and then he can swap out. So his real weakness is going to be flyers, since flyers of course have their racial to go first, or generally they're going to be able to outspeed rabbits as long as they have their flying racial. So you also have a bunch of beast damage and no diversity in your damage, so you're going to be pretty hard countered by flyers with the Dark Moon Rabbit, but as long as you're not queuing into flyers, he can definitely do well. Although one of the main weaknesses with rabbits is they really don't hit all that hard. Their attack power is pretty low and they don't have any hard-hitting cooldowns. Even if Burrow hits on the highest end, it really just doesn't do that much damage. So although they can survive for a really long time,
they don't dish out that much damage. So versus really healy pets like Blossoming Ancients, Singing Sunflowers, they're not going to be able to do anything at all. Versus Shell Shield users, Shell Armor users, Sandstorm, they're not going to be able to dish out any damage. Versus AoE, they're not going to do very well because although they can survive forever with their evasiveness, your backline is going to be cleaved while you're just surviving with your rabbit. So there are plenty of strategies in the game that rabbits don't do particularly well against, although they are a pretty user-friendly pet if you're new to pet battles for just getting easy wins sometimes. The other problem is that there are so many ways to outspeed rabbits. There's Dazzling Dance, there's Primal Cry, there's Temporal Anomaly, even abilities like Foreboding Curse can help you outspeed rabbits, so or priority moves like Trihorn Charge, Surge, those kinds of abilities will really give a rabbit a hard time. So they're not as good as they used to be, but they can situationally be really good cleanup pets. Up next is the Phosphor Rat, who is one of the best darkness users in the game. He of course has Flurry, so you'll want to run the Speed breed for this guy. Although there's nothing wrong with the Power breed if you want to run Sneak Attack. That will deal extra damage as long as you have darkness out and you're not going up against an elemental, since of course elementals aren't counted as blinded under Call Darkness. So the problem with Sneak Attack is if it misses, then you just deal no damage, and it can miss under darkness, unlike Nocturnal Strike. So I generally like to run the Speed Phosphor Rat with Flurry, because since Flurry is coded differently from other multi-hit attacks, even if your first hit of Flurry misses, your second and third hits can still land under darkness. So generally you're going to run Crouch with this guy, although if you're going for your family brawler, he does have Refuge, which is a 6-round sealed storm effectively just for critters. So that is the one weakness to it, is if you're running a well-rounded team with just one critter, being the Phosphor Rat, Shield Storm isn't a particularly good ability, so you're going to want to run Crouch for that. But if you're running all critters just to try to get that achievement done, then Shield Storm's a pretty good ability. Refuge is a pretty good ability, although it's kind of trolly, but definitely good for getting that achievement done. Up next is the Sneaky Marmot. Again, you're going to want the Speed breed for this guy because his moves really benefit from going first. Well, specifically Blinding Powder, although Burrow does benefit from going first, like I've explained before. Although he does have Smoke Bomb. He's one of the two only pets with Smoke Bomb, and typically if you're playing him, you're going to want to run that because it's a pretty good counter to the Twilight Clutch Sister. If you can predict when he's about to use his Twilight Meteorite, you can avoid all of that damage. So he's definitely the better pet with Smoke Bomb since he is so quick. He has Blinding Powder, which is a 3-round cooldown blind, so it is better than Blinding Poison. And he has a Humanoid Attack, which makes him a really good counter to the Twilight Clutch Sister, since he can deal extra damage to dragons. But on the flip side, he is super hard countered by beasts. Since he is a critter, he takes extra damage from beast attacks, and he deals weak damage to beasts with his Humanoid Attack. So he's pretty much always going to have to run with mechanicals. And although he looks like a fantastic counter to the Twilight Clutch Sister, like I said before, Twilight Clutch Sister is typically going to be paired with one or two other beasts, so if he sees your Sneaky Marmot, he's generally just going to swap into his beast and soak your humanoid damage with that, so something to be aware of, although he can definitely do well. You are going to run into troubles if you're outsped, though, because Blinding Powder is basically worthless if you're slower. Up next is the Gleamhoof Fawn. And you can run the Speed breed if you want, although personally I prefer the Power breed. Most critters hit really weak, so having a Power Gleamhoof Fawn is really nice. He hits like a truck if you're running Headbutt, and his hoof is just a really hard-hitting critter attack. you're generally going to want to run Nature's Ward, and that way you can take some damage, throw up your hot, and then swap to the back line. That's overpowered. And if you want to counter AoE teams, you can run Bleat, works just like Haunting Song. And that's another reason to run the Power Breed, is your heals are going to heal for more because of your inflated attack power. So, solid healing pet, just really difficult to land kills on, and he hits like a truck. And lastly, we have the Pygmy Marsual. He's another critter with Flurry, so Decoy Breaker, that's great. You can run either Crouch or Burrow. Both of those are perfectly good options. And you can also run Feign Death or Survival. Generally, you're going to want Feign Death. But he's one of those pets that has several different movesets, so he's especially good in PvP. If your opponent doesn't know what moves you have, you can maybe catch them off guard with a Burrow, hitting them hard. Or you can just run the safe moveset of Flurry, Crouch, and Feign Death. Although since you're going to be generally running the speed of this guy to take advantage of Flurry and Crouch, or Burrow, either of those abilities take advantage of you going first. Survival isn't a half bad ability. It used to be better back before there was so much AoE, because you could use Survival and then you get a free turn after that because you can't die, and then you can just swap out your Pygmy Marsual to the back line and bring it back in. Although back in the day it wasn't a Pygmy Marsual, it was the aquatic, what was that guy? The Mongoose and the Mongoose Pup. That was the survival pet. But now that there's so much AoE, survival isn't going to be quite as good because you can't safely swap your survival pet to the back line and keep him for his cooldowns. So generally the moveset you're going to want is Feign Death, Crouch, although I generally like to run Burrow too, just for some damage diversity, and then of course Flurry for that Decoy Breaker. For honorable mention critters, I have two, and they can both accomplish the same thing. They're fantastic counters to trap users because of course they are critters, so if you're going up against an elemental trap user with Magma Trap, you're going to take weak damage, and you can clear the trap. First one is Tricorn, and he actually does very well with trap users because of his ability Sniff Out, which will remove traps from the enemy team as well as your team. So if you pair him with, say, Little Ragnaros, then you can throw out your Magma Trap, you can swap to your Tricorn, and then you can manually set off that trap yourself with Sniff Out. So he's a fun pet, not the best in the world, and kind of niche since basically he's only useful for clearing items like Decoy, Cyclone, and traps. But you do see a lot of those in the meta. They are really strong, so having a trap remover is really good. Since he is a critter, he can't be stunned. And the other one is Nibbles. Nibbles is one of the few pets who's also critter and good versus humanoid, since he has Bone Bite, and he has Consume Magic, which doesn't remove traps from the enemy team, so you can't use him the same way as Tricorn, where you can set out your trap and then manually set it off. But if you're queuing into somebody else with Magma Trap or Snap Trap, then his Consume Magic will cleanse the trap off of you, and since you're a critter, you also additionally won't be stunned, so that's nice. The one downside to him is generally the moveset you're going to want to run is Bone Bite, Phase Shift, and Consume Magic. And Phase Shift works like Dodge, but dodges count as a buff. So if you are faster than your opponent, you throw out Phase Shift, you will dodge that turn, but then if you Consume Magic on the next turn, you're going to go first. You're going to cleanse all of the debuffs off of you, including traps, dots, whatever happens to be on you. But you're also going to cleanse all buffs, including your Phase Shift. So you're going to cleanse the dodge off of yourself, and then you're no longer going to be dodging, and they're going to be able to hit you on that second turn. So that is something to be aware of. It's not the best synergy in the world, but he still can be situationally pretty useful for countering traps, just like Tricorn. Up next we have Magics, who tend to struggle in the current meta for a couple of reasons. First of all, their racial isn't the strongest. Not being able to be hit for more than 35% of their maximum health is rarely going to be useful. You can use it to soak big hits like the Iron Starlet's one-shot, but other than that, they're just not going to be all that useful just because of their racial. Also, they take extra damage from Twilight Meteorite, from the Twilight Clutch Sister, so that alone puts them in a rough spot currently. But after that gets nerfed, inevitably, I could see a couple of magic pets potentially becoming tier 1 that I consider just honorable mention for now. But I do have 3 tier 1 pets that are magic I'd like to talk about, first being the Hyjal Wisp, of course. With his dodge and wish, he is very difficult to kill. He can survive for a really long time, which synergizes well with his Arcane Blast, which does pretty decent damage after you ramp it up. So if he can survive for a long time, which of course he can with his speed and his dodge combined with his healing, you can actually dish out some decent damage with Arcane Blast, and generally a Hyjal Wisp will be able to take out a Nubiseth Idol no problem, 1v1. Up next is Brightpaw, who really is just here for his one-shot combo. You're going to be running Prowl and Arcane Dash and doing 1465 damage baseline, unless you're going up against a mechanical, of course, or another magic pet. So that's another way to counter Arcane Dash, is just to soak it with a magic pet. But like I said, not the best racial except for those niche situations. But that is a really good one-shot, so he's here just for that. And then you'll generally run Bite just to have some damage diversity. And lastly is Trunks, who you have to be careful with your team composition here. If you don't have a way to buff your hit chance, he is not all that good. But if you run him on a Clone Dance team with, say, Poda or a Lucky Dance user, he is going to instantly become tier 1 with his Moonfire when Elix Fly combo. He can throw out his own weather effect, and then as long as you have the hit buff from Lucky Dance or Uncanny Luck, your when Elix Fly has a 100% chance to hit. It will of course go first as a priority move as long as you have thrown out Moonfire and they didn't change the weather on you. And it has a 30% chance to crit, since there is of course the baseline 5% plus the extra 25% from Uncanny Luck or Lucky Dance. So that combo is one of the best in the games. He hits really hard, and pretty much the only counter to it is to use Mechanical. Mechanical Panda and Dragonlink is going to do particularly well against Trunks, particularly well, because of his Decoy. Decoy is a pretty good counter to that. But Trunks doesn't do half bad against Mechanicals just because he basically has Thunderbolt. It's called Avalanche for him. But that elemental AoE damage is going to give him a fighting chance typically against Mechanicals, although that is one of the better counters to him. For magic honorable mentions, first up we have Servitor Demidos. At 366 attack power, he's one of the hardest hitting pets in the game, and he takes advantage of his attack power with Magic Sword and Soul Rush. Soul Rush having a 25% chance to stun. And Magic Sword is an ability that's unique to just him and the trading card pet, the Treasure Goblin. It hits about as hard as a basic attack, but has an extra 50% chance to crit. So baseline, it's about a 55% chance to crit, which is pretty decent. And his real weakness is his health pool is incredibly low. It's under 1200 at 1197. So he's pretty squishy, but he has Siphon Anima, which is a 3-round cooldown that as long as you land the attack, it'll heal you for 100% of the damage that you do. So that pairs pretty nicely with his high attack power, and he can actually survive for a fairly decent amount of time just with that heal. But his health pool is really low, so he is pretty squishy. Up next is the Jade Oozling. For this guy, you're going to want the Power Breed. And what makes him so good is the synergy between his moves, Absorb, Corrosion, and Acidic Goo. Specifically, the dots do very nicely together. Acidic Goo providing a buff to all of your damage by 25%, and Corrosion just adding a flat 86 damage to all of your attacks. So if you get Acidic Goo and Corrosion on an enemy, they are going to melt very quickly to your dots, and that also buffs the damage from your Absorb, and consequently the healing, because you heal for 100% of the damage that you do. So His real problem is he's incredibly slow at 244 speed, so he can die pretty quickly. But if you don't kill him off quickly, he can dish out quite a bit of damage, especially versus undeads. Up next is the Blood Boil, and for this guy you're going to want the Speed breed, although pretty much all of them work the same. I personally like the Speed best because of his Plagued Blood and Drained Blood, combined with his magic racial. He's very tanky, very difficult to kill. For damage diversity, you're generally going to want Ooze Touch, but if you want to super counter humanoids, you do have Diseased Bite available. So this guy is going to pair very well with abilities like Build Turret, or with Immolation in particular. Does very well with the Fiendish Imp, or with Detective Ray, who also has Immolation. You can just throw up your Immolation, swap to the back line, bring in your Blood Boil, and throw up Plague Blood, and that will heal your Immolation user. So pretty good synergy there, and just a very good tanky pet. Up next is the Enchanted Pen, one of my favorite magic pets. He has dodge, and he's fairly fast, but if he is outsped, no problem. He has Foreboding Curse, which will slow the enemy by 25%, as well as adding a little bit of damage to every attack, and it lasts for 4 turns, so it's a very good ability. There are very few pets with Foreboding Curse, and most of them kind of suck, so I think the Enchanted Pen is the best Foreboding Curse user in the game currently, and he's able to take advantage of his Foreboding Curse with Quills. Quills is a flying type ability, so since he is a magic pet with flying attacks, he's one of the few double counters to aquatics in the game, although he kind of looks a little better than he actually turns out to do in practice for countering aquatics like the Emperor Crab, because the Emperor Crab has Surge. He can go first anyways, even if you slow him, and also the Emperor Crab has Shell Shield, so he's going to be able to tank you pretty well. But it is pretty nice to be able to double counter aquatics with the Enchanted Pen, and he's just a really fun pet, although a little bit squishy since he doesn't have any healing. All he can do to survive is his dodge. Up next is the Void Shardling, who is a little bit of a gimmick pet. His health is a little bit low, his attack power isn't too great, but his speed is really solid at 325, and he has dodge, so he's able to take advantage of that. He has Soul Rush, just like Servant of Demidos. He has that chance to stun, and then he has Arcane Blast. So the real problem with him is he has no damage diversity, so if you queue into a magic pet, he's going to do very poorly. If you are outsped, he's also not going to do that well, but he's a pretty cool looking pet, and his moveset isn't half bad, especially since he does have that speed breed available with dodge. I figured he was worth mentioning. That's really the only thing that he does well, is that he is fast and he has a dodge. If you're running a non-speed breed, he's just garbage. Or if you're outsped, he's really no good. Up next we have the Enchanted Broom. He's one of the better pets out there with Sweep, and he also has Cleanup, so you have to be a little bit careful if you're running him on a minefield team not to use Cleanup to remove your own mines. But Cleanup works just like Sniff Out for Tricorn, where it'll remove items including turrets, it'll remove decoys, it'll remove traps, it'll remove cyclones. Just a really solid ability. Sweep, of course, is kind of like Nethergate, except that instead of swapping into the next pet, it will specifically swap into the highest health pet, so be aware of that. And then generally, since you are pretty quick, you can run Batter, although if you're worried about being countered by dragons, you could just run Broom. Just a really good utility pet. Also for honorable mentions, I have the Celestial Calf. I don't personally have one, but I know that he works really well when you combine him with an otherwise squishy pet, like maybe the Iron Starlet, who doesn't have any defenses or healing because of his Wish combined with Celestial Blessing. He can basically give any other pet a crouch, and he can also heal them up pretty well. And then he just has aquatic damage, which is pretty nice. Makes him good for taking out elemental healers like the Singing Sunflower and the Blossoming Ancient, pesky pets like that. Really solid. Probably tier 1 pet, but I just don't personally have him, so I haven't gotten to try him out. I don't know quite how good he is. And lastly, for honorable mentions, I have Zeraj the Depleted, another magic pet that I don't personally have yet, but I've seen Nathan use it in his channel, Kobox Gaming. And the real weakness that I see to it is it doesn't have any damage diversity, but it has some really cool moves. First of all, it has Face Punch, which is a 4-round cooldown that works just like Nethergate, so that's pretty cool. Since Nethergate has a 5-round cooldown, Face Punch is a little bit better. He also has Evanescence, which works nicely since he is a fairly fast pet at 314 speed. He does especially well if you pair him with a Dazzling Dance user, since he will be outsped by some pets. But the other downside to him is his attack power is very low, so generally you're probably going to want to run Nether Blast so that you can ramp up your damage. But since he is kind of cooldown reliant, you are going to be swapping, so Spirit Firebolt might be a better move in some situations. There are a couple teams that are going to do well with him, but since he only has magic damage available to him, you're pretty much limited to pairing him with a pet that has good elemental damage so that you aren't totally screwed if you queue into mechanicals. Up next we have elementals, and their racial is situationally very useful. Sometimes it's not going to be helpful at all, but occasionally it is going to come in very handy. They are immune to negative weather effects such as the blind from Cold Darkness, so they don't have that 10% chance to miss like other pets do. Also, they aren't counted as blinded under darkness, so abilities like Spectral Strike and Nocturnal Strike are only going to have a 40% chance to hit against them under darkness, and Sneak Attack is not going to deal bonus damage to them. Also, they are not affected by the healing reduction of Call Darkness, so elementals with healing cannot be countered with Call Darkness, and that makes them pretty overpowered. They do not have a chance to miss under Sandstorm, but they do have all of their attacks reduced still, just like other pets do under Sandstorm by that small amount. They do not count as burning, and they do not take the damage from Scorched Earth. They are not considered chilled under Cold Blizzard. They do take extra damage from Mana Surge under Arcane Winds, and they also take the extra damage from Call Lightning from every attack, but they do take weak damage from Call Lightning and the extra Call Lightning ticks because they Call Lightning is mechanical damage and it deals weak damage to them. So, situationally, their racial can be valuable, especially against Call Darkness. Not having that chance to miss is very nice, and also not being affected by the healing reduction is very strong. First up, we have the Nightshade Sproutling, and for this guy, you're going to want the Speed Breed, and you're going to run Lash, Call Darkness, and Blinding Poison. Blinding Poison is much better if you can go first because you'll make them miss on the turn that you use it, and they're going to be blinded on the next turn. So, very good ability there. Lash does extra damage if you go first, so that's why you're going to want the Speed Breed. And Call Darkness makes him a very good pick to put on any Darkness team. Although, if you want, you can give up Call Darkness for Nature's Ward, which isn't a half bad ability, but I personally prefer Call Darkness. I've tried Nature's Ward a couple times on him, and the problem you'll run into is his healing is going to be a little bit less than that of the next pet on this list, the Autumnal Sproutling, because you're running the Speed Breed. His Hot is not going to heal for as much per tick per turn, so generally you're going to run Call Darkness with this guy and just put him on a Darkness team with either Nocturnal Strike or Spectral Strike or maybe the Frostfur Rat, pets like that. Like I said, next pet on the list is going to be the Autumnal Sproutling, and this guy's going to be the Power breed, and he'll run Club, Nature's Ward, and Fist of the Forest. This guy hits like a truck, and he can heal for a lot because of his Hot. He's going to heal for a lot because of his high attack power, and like I said, he hits really hard. He pairs particularly well with Mercolot, so the strategy is to throw up Righteous Inspiration. That'll swap into your Autumnal Sproutling, so you do have to make sure that your Autumnal Sproutling has higher health than whichever other pet you have, but there's plenty of pets that have 1400 health or less. And if you have equal health with the other pet, just make sure that your autumnal sproutling is in the second slot, and the third pet that you don't want to have swapped in is in the third slot. So Righteous Inspiration plus Fish of the Forest equals 1380 elemental damage, which is almost a one-shot for everything that isn't a critter or a magic pet. So very solid combo there. It also happens to cover for Merkalot's weakness to mechanicals, so very solid tier 1 pet. Super tanky. He fits pretty well on just about any team. Next up is the Jade Mist Dancer. You're going to want the speed breed of this guy at 317. He isn't the fastest, but he is going to be able to outspeed some pets, and that speed can definitely come in handy. And the moveset here is Steam Vent, Rain Dance, and Acid Rain. He is the go-to pet for any clone dance strategy, just because he is able to throw out that extra AoE in addition to changing the weather. If you're going up against maybe a Call Darkness team, you can change that weather to Acid Rain, which is really good. It'll buff that hit chance of Cyclone up by 10%, and then of course Rain Dance buffs your Cyclone by 50%, so the strategy is start with whatever Cyclone pet you want, whether it's the Blighthawk or the Infinite Hatchling or whatever, and throw out your Cyclone, then swap to your Jade Mist Dancer, throw up Rain Dance, that'll buff your Cyclone up to an 85% hit chance, and with Acid Rain plus Cyclone, you're going to do a ridiculous amount of AoE pressure. Cyclone did receive a nerf, so now it does a range between about half of what it used to and the full damage that it used to, and it's just RNG for how hard it hits, but it's still a very solid combo and one of the best in the meta for sure. Next up are all of the elemental healers with photosynthesis and sunlight, and there are 4 of them. There's the Blossoming Ancient, there's Brute, there's the Singing Sunflower, and the newest one is Fosling. All 4 of these pets are tier 0 because photosynthesis plus sunlight is brokenly OP in PvP. There are so few ways to counter it. Unless you have a weather changer and hard-hitting aquatic damage, they are just almost impossible to kill and will inevitably win almost all battles just because of how much healing they can do. Especially because even if you do have aquatic damage that's strong versus elementals, they can just throw up their photosynthesis, throw up Sunny Day, and then swap to the backline where you can't hit them, and they're just going to heal to full. So your aquatic damage is worthless. And personally, I'd like to see several nerfs to all of these pets. I don't think it's fair for any of them to have both photosynthesis and sunlight available, so I would like to see those put on the same tree where you have to choose between one or the other. And also I would like to see a couple nerfs to these abilities. I'd like to see photosynthesis given maybe a cooldown like 5 rounds. It already lasts for 5 rounds, so that wouldn't be too much of a nerf. But if the Ravenous Prideling's Disruption was buffed a little bit, where currently, by the way, Disruption is only a single target purge, which is kind of no good because if you're trying to counter a Blossoming Ancient with photosynthesis and you want to purge his hot, all he has to do is swap to the backline and you can't purge it anymore. So first of all, I would like to see Disruption be given AoE ability so that it can purge hots and buffs on the backline pets as well as the frontline pet. But also I think that photosynthesis is very much in need of a cooldown because currently if you purge it off, then they're just going to reapply it on the next turn anyways, and you didn't really accomplish anything. So, like I said, first of all, I would like to see them nerfed where they have to choose between one or the other. So if somebody wants to run this scummy combo and troll people in the queue, they have to play with one pet that has sunlight and the other pet has photosynthesis in order to do that. And that would at least be a little bit more manageable, a little bit easier to counter. But the Blossoming Ancient and Brute in particular are especially overpowered because they're basically immune to dots, since they can just spam Iron Bark, which has no cooldown. It deals almost as much damage as a basic attack, and basically applies a 1-round version of Shell Shield. So killing them with dots is much harder than killing the Singing Sunflower and the Fosling. And abilities like Stampede or Call the Pack from the Alteric Brewpup are just going to be completely dodged and negated as long as they have Iron Bark up. So yeah, all 4 of these pets are tier 0 just because photosynthesis plus sunlight is so brokenly overpowered, and there's definitely need of a nerf. I've also heard people asking for backline healing in particular to be nerfed, so maybe make it so that if you put a photosynthesis and then swap to the backline, it's only half as effective as if you were on the front line, and I think that could also be a nice nerf. It would also affect the Fiendish Imp, who is the best pet in the game right now, or at least one of the top 5. So that would be a nice nerf to see, I think, personally. Next up are all of the elementals with Magma Trap. There are 4 of them currently. There is the Blazehound, the Magma Rageling, Little Ragnaros, and newly added from, I believe, Island Expeditions is the Tinderpup. 3 of these pets also have Magma Wave, so they are able to set off their own Magma Trap. But generally, it's going to be better not to run that ability, especially for Little Ragnaros and the Magma Rageling, because they are so slow. It's better off for you to just let the Magma Trap interrupt the enemy, because that way they're going to lose 2 turns, the turn that they get interrupted, and also the next turn where they will still be stunned. So generally you're going to run Flamethrower for Magma Rageling and Sulphurous Smash, but it is nice to know that you can set off that trap ability with Magma Wave, and the new pet, the Tinderpup, has about 305 speed, I believe, which is pretty good. Not the fastest, but it is going to allow him to take advantage of... oh, it's 301 speed, sorry. He has 301 speed. Again, not the fastest speed in the world, but he is able to choose Rush, which works like Leap, where it gives you 100% speed buff. So if you choose Magma Wave, Magma Trap, and then Rush, you can set down your trap, you can rush, and then you'll go first generally, and you can set off the trap to interrupt them with Magma Wave, which isn't a half bad ability, although the Tinderpup and the Blazehound are generally going to want to run Retrieve, which is a forward round cooldown version of Nethergate like the Fiendish Imp has, except that it does swap into the highest health pet rather than the simply the next pet, so that's something to be aware of. But it is nice that it has a 1 round shorter cooldown than Nethergate. And all 4 of these pets are tier 1 simply because of how good traps are. Especially if you get good RNG with them, your enemy's going to lose 2 turns effectively whenever the trap goes off, because, like I said, they are going to be interrupted for the turn that they tried to attack or heal or make a move, whatever it was, and they're also going to be stunned on the next turn. So really the only way they can counter it is to use a critter or to hopefully have Arcane Winds, which isn't very common. Arcane Winds is one of my favorite weather abilities, but there just aren't a ton of pets in the meta with it. So yeah, it's traps are very good. And lastly, we have the Flickering Argonite. He is basically going to be a darkness-only pet, and the moveset is Feedback. Since he isn't that fast, he isn't really fast enough to take advantage of Spark, so he is going to be stuck using Feedback generally, unless you have a Dazzling Dance user on your team. And then he has Restoration, which is a priority heal that just heals for 25%. And since he's elemental, he is going to be just fine with darkness. His heal is not going to be nerfed since he is not affected by the weather. And then Surge of Light is what makes him really cool. He is the only elemental with this ability, and generally Surge of Light has a 10% chance to miss on most pets that use it, because you're going to put it under darkness, and that 10% chance to miss can really mess with you. So an elemental with Surge of Light is really good. It has a 100% chance to stun if the weather is darkness, and that includes against other elementals. Typically elementals are immune to darkness effects, so abilities like Nocturnal Strike and Spectral Strike are going to miss more often than not against elementals. Sneak attack from the Phosphor Rat is not going to deal extra damage to elementals under darkness, but Surge of Light is different. It doesn't require the enemy to be blinded, it just requires the weather to be darkness, and it will always stun, unless of course they're a critter. So, pretty solid pet. Arguably tier 1, I'd say, but I'm at least going to give him an honorable mention, just because Surge of Light has only a 3-round cooldown currently. I'd like to see that nerfed also. I think it should have a 4-round cooldown to be a little bit more in line with some other abilities. A few elemental honorable mentions are going to include the Droplet of Isiraj, as well as the Everliving Spore, just because of their combo of Acid Rain plus Dreadful Breath. They are 2 of the 3 only pets with this ability. Blight Breath being the best, just because he is undead. But the Droplet of Isiraj has a power breed available to him. He is really slow with that breed, so I personally don't have much success currently with this pet. But if you aren't killed quickly, you can definitely cleave for a ton of damage, especially against dragons. And then I don't actually have the Everliving Spore, but he's HH, so he's going to be a bit more tanky, and that's going to allow him to probably get out a little bit more damage, even though his attack power isn't quite so good. And generally you're going to run Swallow You Whole with the Droplet of Isiraj. For the Everliving Spore, you'll probably just run Slime, which is a pretty cool ability, 1-round cooldown that just deals a bit more damage than a basic attack. Next up is the Molten Corgi. Nothing too special about this guy, but he is pretty difficult to kill. He does have Puppies of the Flame. You could run Infernal Herding, which works kind of like Nethergate, except that it's going to have a 4-round cooldown and it swaps into the enemy's lowest health pet. But generally I see Puppies of the Flame 99% of all games. Most people don't even know that the Molten Corgi has a swap out ability, but he is 325 speed, so it isn't half bad. And what makes him so tanky is Puppies of the Flame combined with Cauterize. He just is really quite difficult to take down if you don't have some aquatic damage. He can survive for a long time, so pairing him with a dot user, like maybe a haunt user, is generally a good strategy. And lastly, I have the Living Sandling, who is probably the strongest of these honorable mentions. He's arguably tier 1. He's a very, very solid Sandstorm pet because he is elemental. He doesn't have the chance to miss like other pets do under Sandstorm. And his other 2 moves are going to take advantage of the fact that he isn't very quick. First one is Quicksand, and the other is Sandbolt. Both of these are slows, and they're going to allow him to outspeed his opponent, even though he is very slow. Generally, the best breed, I think, is the HP, although all 4 breeds of this guy are very good. The HH is also going to be very good. He's incredibly tanky because of Sandstorm, and he's just going to fit in very well with any Sandstorm team since he is immune to the Abyss effect. Quicksand works a lot like Squeeze, but it does have the added benefit of slowing the enemy's active pet. So whereas Squeeze is just going to slow the pet that you hit it with, Quicksand just applies a debuff to the enemy team. So even if they swap into another pet, the next pet is going to still be slowed by 50% for 2 rounds, which is very, very good. Quicksand is a really strong ability. Up next we have Beasts, starting with the Blinding Poison Snakes. For the Death Adder Hatchling and the Rose Typhon, you're going to want the Speed breed because of Blinding Poison. It's much better if you go first. You will blind them on the turn that you use it, and they will also be blinded on the next turn. Also, blinds do not cause resilience the way stuns, sleeps, and polymorphs do, and they are not affected by resilience. So it's basically just free CC, and really effective if you can block important cooldowns with it. Generally the moveset's going to be Poison Fang and Puncture Wound. Blinding Poison does count as a poison, so you can get that double damage for Puncture Wound out of a Blinding Poison, but generally if somebody sees that they're blinded, they're just going to swap out, so that's why you're going to want to run the Poison Fang. If you have the dot on them, that is going to make them think twice about swapping to the back line and eating that dot damage on the back line. So Generally, that's how you're going to be able to get that double damage with Puncture Wound. And the third snake is the Guardian Cobra Hatchling. He isn't quite as fast as the Rose Typhon and the Death Adder Hatchling at only 325 speed, but if he is slower, you do have Slither available. It's a 3-round cooldown, 2-round duration slow, so not the best in the world. It's also not an area of effect the way Quicksand is, so if you slow the enemy and then they swap out, the pet that swaps in is not going to be slowed the way Quicksand will. But it's still a pretty decent ability. It will give you the speed advantage sometimes, which can really help you out with your blinding poison, as well as your flurry. Flurry does extra damage if you're faster, and it's just a spammable decoy breaker. So, pretty solid pet. Not the fastest ever, but definitely all three of these are good tier 1 pets just because of how good blinding poison is. Next up we have Kovok, and for this guy you're going to want the HS breed. All three of them are tier 1, all three breeds, but the HS is generally going to pull ahead just because you can sometimes get an extra attack off before you die with that 305 speed. And what makes him so good is Poison Fang combined with Black Claw. He's generally going to run pheromones as well, which means if you throw out Poison Fang and Black Claw, and then for some reason they decide to swap to the back line with that dot, then pheromones is just going to tear them apart. Also, this is pretty good against Haunt. Not that you run into Haunt very often, but if you do run into Haunters and they come back to life with Black Claw, then pheromones will deal a ton of damage to them while they're on the back line. So Kovok is a very solid pet. He fits in pretty nicely with AoE teams just because he has pheromones, although generally you're going to want to always start with him since pheromones doesn't do split damage. It also doesn't do any damage to the frontline pet, so you do have to be aware of that, but it's still a really solid ability. And he also does really, really well with dot cleaves, so pets with immolation or dots are going to synergize very well with him because of his Black Claw ability. Next up is Twilight, and he's definitely one of the best pets in the game right now just because he has Call Darkness and Surge of Light. I believe he's the only pet in the game with both of these abilities. Call Darkness, just one of the best weather effects in the game right now, and Surge of Light is only a 3-round cooldown that baseline has a 25% chance to stun, and Under Darkness will always stun even versus elementals. So a very good ability. Probably should be more like a 4-round cooldown just for balance sake, but currently that's what makes him so overpowered. And generally you're going to run Twilight Fire with him, which is a 1-round cooldown, so he is occasionally going to be cooldown locked the way the Bone Serpent used to be, but he's still a really solid pet. He dishes out a lot of damage. That stun is very difficult to play around with that short 3-round cooldown, and he isn't the fastest pet in the world, but you can run Pounce if you want with him just to avoid being cooldown locked. I just personally would recommend Twilight Fire because it's going to give you such a good matchup against the mechanicals that will otherwise give Twilight a pretty difficult time. Also worth noting is he's really good versus the Twilight Clutch Sister. At 293 speed, he is just a little bit faster than all three breeds of the dragon, and he deals really strong damage with Surge of Light and Call Darkness, so definitely a solid counter there, and he's going to fit in pretty well with any Darkness team. Up next is Poda. He only has one breed, and he's going to fit in very nicely with Clone Dance teams. He doesn't have Rain Dance, but he does have Uncanny Luck, which situationally can be better. It's going to be a 4-round buff to your hit chance by 50% and a 25% crit chance buff. So the important thing there really is the hit chance, although the extra crits can be very nice. But generally, he's going to fit in very nicely with Cyclone users, so the strategy, just like with the Jade Mist Dancer, is you throw out your Cyclone, then you swap into Poda, and instead of Rain Dance, you'll just throw up Uncanny Luck. That'll give you that 4-round buff to your hit chance, and then you can feign death into your third pet. Generally, that's going to be a pet with Demolish, or maybe Trunks with When Elix Fly. Poda plus Trunks is one of the strongest combos in the game. It's pretty well shut down by Decoy, but that's why you're going to be running Cyclone. The Cyclone is a decoy breaker. So with Uncanny Luck, Trunks is going to deal a ridiculous amount of damage with his priority move, When Elix Fly. And
it's just a really, really solid combo. Up next is the Infernal Pyreclaw. I personally prefer the power balance just for the extra attack power, but there's nothing wrong with the speed balance just for the extra speed. However, generally you're going to run Adrenaline Rush anyways, which is a really good speed buff, so that's why I think the power balance is probably the best breed. And he's a really solid pet to pair with any other AoE pets. He does really well on AoE cleaves because of his ability Cleave, which is a split damage ability. So that is not a decoy breaker, but it is a pretty solid AoE just because even if they have only 2 or 1 pets remaining, it's still going to do full damage. It was nerfed because the Weeb Nation used to have it, and it was just way too much damage, but now it just does as much damage as a basic attack, and it's a really solid AoE ability. And he also has the ability Great Sting, 4-round cooldown. It will act as a decoy breaker, and additionally, for whatever reason, even if your opponent has dodge up, it will still go through dodge, which is kind of buggy, but it's just going to be a 2-round poison dot on all 3 of the enemy pets, so he does very well in AoE teams because of these 2 abilities, Great Sting and Cleave. Also, I suppose if you want, you could run Shell Armor, but generally you're going to see the Pyreclaw with Great Sting. Up next is the Vengeful Porcupet. He's always been good. What makes him so good is he's able to take advantage of Powerball combined with Spirit Spikes and Flank. Flank does extra damage if you're faster, and Powerball is a speed buff that does not reset if you swap or anything. Really, the only way to counter it is the new Ravenous Pridelings ability, Disruption, but that's not AoE, so as long as you're on the back line, you're safe from that. And it's just a really, really solid pet. Spirit Spikes is a fairly good defensive that also reflects a really good amount of damage. It's going to be as much as a basic attack for 2 rounds effectively if you go first, which you can generally do with Powerball. And so the one thing that you have to be aware of with this guy is Spirit Spikes' reflect damage, for whatever reason, is considered a damage over time effect. So against aquatics, that reflect damage is only going to be half as, it's only going to hit half as hard as the tooltip says. So aquatics are kind of a weak counter to the Vengeful Porcupet. Obviously, he doesn't do very well against humanoids because he has all critter damage, but he's still a really, really solid tier 1 pet. Next up, we have the Zandalari Toad Nibbler. You're going to want the speed breed of this guy, although there's nothing really wrong with the power breed since you are generally going to run Primal Cry, but I like the speed breed personally. With Primal Cry, he's going to be able to outspeed just about everything, and you're going to run Flank and Black Claw with this guy. He's going to be able to tear apart undead, so he fits very nicely with humanoids. Pretty good pet to combo with the Twilight Clutch Sister since you can throw out the slow. And his Black Claw ability is going to make him do well with any dot pet or immolation user. Really solid tier 1 pet. Although the one thing that I have to say about him is he's incredibly squishy at only 1237 health. Next up is the Alpine Foxling. On his own, he is already a really good pet. He has Flurry, which, like I said, is a decoy breaker. He has Crouch, so he can mitigate damage very effectively and sit at his beast racial for a very long time. And he has Dazzling Dance, which is the real reason he's tier 1. Dazzling Dance, when paired with other overpowered pets, is a really, really powerful ability. When you combine it with abilities like Jar of Smelly Liquid from Wormy Tunkins, or stuns from various pets, or even dodge, then Dazzling Dance is a really powerful ability. Alpine Foxling plus the Twilight Clutch Sister is one of the strongest combos in the game. They actually complement each other very well. Dazzling Dance is going to allow that Twilight Clutch Sister to be able to outspeed almost everything and take advantage of his dodge. The Alpine Foxling takes weak damage from humanoid attacks, which are strong versus the Dragonkin. He deals strong damage to undeads with Flurry, and of course undeads take weak damage from the Twilight Meteorite, so that's pretty good damage. And additionally, the Twilight Clutch Sister has the Twilight Fire to answer all the mechanicals that are going to be good against the Alpine Foxling. So they complement each other very well.
one of the strongest combos in the game, actually, is just double Twilight Clutch Sister because of how much AoE pressure you can put out, and then an Alpine Foxling to give them the speed buff and to counter the undeads that they're weak to. Up next we have the Scalded Basilisk Hatchling. He's going to be HS, which is not the fastest pet in the world at 305 speed, but when he is faster, he is a total monster. He has a stun, which takes advantage of him being faster. He has Thrash, which does extra damage if he's faster. And then he has Feign Death if he has a bad matchup and you want to swap him to somebody else or just tactically avoid attacks. He is basically worthless if he's slower, since both his stun and his basic attack Thrash are going to be dependent on you going first. So that is something to be aware of, but he can do fairly well against pets like the Twilight Clutch Sister, against Twilight, against Bone Serpents. Pets that aren't able to outspeed him are really going to struggle against him. And lastly, we have the Direhorn, specifically the stunned Direhorn, just because of his overinflated attack power. He hits really hard, and generally the moveset is going to be Primal Cry, Horn Attack, and Trihorn Charge. Trihorn Charge, unfortunately, still has an 85% hit chance. It's one of those few abilities in the game that still has that small chance to miss, so that can really screw you over if that ability misses. But it is a priority move, and it hits harder than a regular basic attack, so that's the trade-off. And then Horn Attack just synergizes very well with Primal Cry. Primal Cry is an AoE slow on only a 3-round cooldown, and it lasts for 4 turns, so you can have 100% uptime on it. And Trihorn Charge has a 50% chance to interrupt the enemy and make them lose their turn on only a 1-round cooldown, and deals as much damage as the basic attack. So Stunned Direhorn, very solid pet. All of the Direhorns are good, but the Stunned Direhorn just hits the hardest, so that's why I consider him the best. First up for Beast Honorable Mentions is Xufu, Cub of Zwen. He is from the Celestial Tournament, and what makes him so good is his Prowl plus Feed combo, combined with his high attack power, is going to hit really hard and heal you for a lot. He also has Spirit Claws, which does quite a bit more damage than a regular basic attack. Although it only has an 80% hit chance, it does have a 100% hit chance as long as the weather is Moonlight. So he just hits like a truck. His real weakness, though, is he is incredibly slow. So that's why I don't consider him tier 1, but he does hit really hard. Also, Banfu, Cub of Banlu, is basically the speed version of Xufu, but he's a little bit better just because of his speed. I don't consider him tier 1 just because he is very dependent on having Moonlight be the weather, since you are generally going to run Spirit Claws with him, but he does have the Feed Prowl combo that Xufu has, and he is going to be able to pull ahead in some situations where Xufu might struggle with his low speed, just because at 317 speed he's as fast as a Jade Mist Dancer, and he can really put in work. Solid pet, although he is a total pain in the butt to get, I have to say that. Next we have Moon, who is kind of a poor man's version of the Alpine Foxling. He is not quite as good just because he doesn't have Flurry, so he doesn't have a Decoy Breaker, but he does have Crouch and basically Dazzling Dance. His Dazzling Dance is called Moon Dance, but it works exactly the same way, and generally you're going to run Moonfang with this guy, so he's going to be incredibly weak to mechanicals just because he already takes strong damage from mechanical attacks, and he has that magic type basic attack. But he's still a really solid pet. Dazzling Dance alone makes him a very good pet, so although he's not as good as the Alpine Foxling, he's still going to generally do almost as well in all situations. Up next is the Alteric Brewpup. You can run him as an AoE pet with Avalanche, but what makes him unique is his Call the Pack ability. It works kind of like Stampede, where it does its attacks in 3 different attacks, but it's not going to last for 3 turns. So it applies a Shattered Defense debuff, causing them to take 100% extra damage, which means that he works really well with dots like Curse of Doom or Immolation, Volcano, those kinds of abilities. Not the best pet in the world, but he's definitely a lot of fun and can generally catch your opponent by surprise, since they're sometimes going to be expecting Avalanche, and then you can use Call the Pack to give them that Shattered Defensives debuff. Generally, you're going to run the good stuff with him, which doesn't heal him at all, but it does heal his backline pets. So he's going to do well with other good pets that can benefit from that AoE healing. And I don't really consider him tier 1, but I do consider him worth mentioning just because of his unique ability called a pack. Up next is the Thaumaturgical Piglet, and he just hits like a truck. He has Arcane Dash, the same ability as Bright Paw. He is generally going to run Pig Out and Ooze Touch, so with all that magic damage, he is going to be incredibly weak to magic pets, the same as Moon, but he just hits really hard. He does very nicely as long as the weather is Moonlight, and on his own, he can just survive pretty well with Pig Out, and like I said, he just hits really hard. Arcane Dash hits incredibly hard, especially if you have your Beast Racial up and has that extra 25% chance to stun. So, solid pet. Not the best in the world, but definitely worth mentioning. And last on the list for honorable mention beasts is the Zandalari Shin Chomper. His moveset is really, really good. He has a bleed. He also has Black Claw, so he works kind of like Kovok. And he also has Aura of Gonk, which is a new ability in Battle for Azeroth that will heal your frontline pet every time you deal damage. So if you throw up Aura of Gonk and then swap to somebody else, it won't heal your Shin Chomper, it'll heal whoever's on the front line. So that's something to keep in mind, is if you try to combine it with, say, an Immolation user, it's not going to heal your Immolation user the way Plagued Blood or Touch the Animus will. It's just going to heal your frontline pet. But it's a really good ability. It's so good that they actually started it off with the setback that it's going to start on cooldown, and it has an 8-round cooldown, so you can't even use this ability until the 9th turn of the game, which I think is very fair. It's a really strong heal. It's doubled. The healing is doubled if your pet is below 50% HP. So that, when combined with his bleed, is really, really good synergy. The real reason why he isn't a tier 1 pet, though, and I'm just going to leave him at an honorable mention, is he has really solid attack power, but he's incredibly squishy. He has less than 1400 health, and his speed is just garbage. 265 is not really going to outspeed anything, just about. So if he was a little bit faster, he would definitely do better, but because of his slow speed, he's really not the best in the world, although he is a very solid pet and definitely a lot of fun for PvP, just because of how powerful Aura of Gonk is if you are not stopped. Up next we have Aquatic, starting with the Hermit Crab. He is really good primarily just because of how good his stats are. He has more stats than he should. He has baseline health at 1400. He has 349 speed, which is really, really good. It's going to outspeed most pets in the meta. And he has 284 attack power, which is just more than he should have with the other stats that he has. So, really, really solid pet, primarily just because of his overinflated stats. So we might see a nerf to that, but even if his stats get nerfed, he should probably still be tier 1, I think, or at least an honorable mention worthy pet because of his moveset. Generally, you're going to run Fish Slap. Pinch isn't a bad option, but it does reset like other abilities similar to it. If you swap out, it resets back to 228 damage. So generally, Fish Slap is going to be better just for PvP because swapping happens a lot. And he's generally going to run Shell Armor and Dive just to be able to mitigate and avoid damage, although you can exchange Shell Armor for Bubble. Situationally, that can be better, although in the current meta, I think Shell Armor is a little bit stronger, especially with your high speed. You can really take advantage of going first with that and basically get 3 rounds out of it effectively. Next up is the Slithershock Elver. You're going to want the speed breed for this guy to take advantage of Dodge and Dive. You can exchange Dodge for Clobber, which isn't a bad ability, especially if you don't have other stuns on your team. But you'll still want the speed breed so that you can go first to really get full advantage out of that. And nothing too special about this guy. He's kind of like a slower rabbit at 325 speed. He is outspeedable for sure. But if he is faster, then he can survive for a really, really long time with his damage avoidance. Next up is the Puddle Terror, and he's just really good at surviving for a really long time with his heals. He has Nature's Ward, which is a really, really good hot. It's what the Terraclaw has. He also has Sunlight, so you can combine that for a lot of healing and just be really trolly, or you can exchange Sunlight for Dive to have an avoidance move. And he's just really difficult to kill because after he takes some damage, he can just throw up his hot, swap to the back line where you can't hit him, and just continue to heal. So, very tanky pet. Also, he doesn't have bad stats, so he can dish out reasonable damage while at the same time healing for a lot. Next up is the Purple Puffer, and he has a power breed. That's the only one available, which works really well with his moveset. He has Surge, so that if you are slower, which is often going to happen since he is really slow, you can still go first, which can come in handy for sure. He has Pump, which hits really hard because of your high attack power, and he has Healing Wave, which is going to be a really solid heal since he has such a high attack power. It's going to cause his heal to be really powerful. One problem he runs into is he is a little bit squishy since his really only defensive is that heal. So if you queue into Darkness, he's basically worthless. But he still is kind of a glass cannon. He can hit really hard. Very solid tier 1 pet. Next up is the Magical Crawdad. He's incredibly tanky. He's able to spec into 2 different heals if you want. You can go with Renewing Mists and Wish for double healing. Although generally in PvP I would recommend Shell Shield. That one combined with his Aquatic Racial basically gives him immunity to dot damage. So Wish, Shell Shield, and Surge is generally the moveset for this guy. So he doesn't hit very hard at all. But he can survive for forever and just very difficult to kill if you don't have a way to counter his healing or just really hard hitting flying damage to counter him. Next up is the Emperor Crab, and he's actually even better at surviving than the Magical Crawdad. His inflated attack power is going to make his heal really, really strong. He has Shell Shield to block Immolation, to block dots, to block all sorts of damage, and just to survive for forever. And generally you're going to run Surge with this guy because he hits so hard. His Surge actually hits almost as hard as a basic attack for a normal pet, but it's a priority move, so it always goes first, which is really, really good. Fun fact is if you get stunned by a Magma Trap or a Snap Trap while you're trying to go for Surge or a priority move like that, you won't get the Surge off, but you will still keep the speed buff that basically gives you like 1600 or 16,000 speed after you come out of the stun. So until you use Surge again, you're going to continue to have that speed buff. So you will go first with your Healing Wave and your Shell Shield. I'm not going to run into that too much, and it's just kind of a weird bug that isn't really, you can't really take advantage of it because it's all RNG, but it is something fun to be aware of. And the Emperor Crab's just really good at surviving for a really long time. If you don't have Darkness or some way to mitigate his healing, he's very, very able to 3v1 pets in PvP. Very solid pet. Also, we have the Tongue Lasher. He only has 1 breed available, and that is a speed breed, and that works really well with his ability Kragwa's Wrath. It is an AoE ability. It doesn't hit all that hard, but it does do split damage, and it also forces the enemy pet out like Nethergate, and it swaps in the enemy's lowest health pet. So it's going to synergize very well with Minefield. He's generally going to run Super Sticky Goo, which is kind of it's kind of anti-synergy with the swap out ability. You have to be careful not to root them before you try to swap them out, but situationally it can be nice for you to have the ability to both root them and also swap them out if you don't like the matchup. So Toxic Skin is just a garbage ability, so you're kind of stuck with Super Sticky Goo anyways. And then, because he is a speed pet, he can go first with Tongue Lash, and it works just like Flank and Flurry, except that it doesn't break decoys the way Flurry does. So, really good against undeads. Really fun pet. He is a little bit squishy, but he hits pretty hard considering how much speed he has, so that's the trade-off. And Kragwa's Wrath is just a really cool ability. It's only a 4-round cooldown swap out ability, just like Nethergate, so except that Nethergate's a 5-round cooldown, so that is the advantage there. And lastly, we have the Shadowback Crawler. You're going to want the speed breed of this guy. He has several breeds available, but the speed is best since he does have a stun called Crystal Prison, and he works really well with Darkness teams because he is an aquatic with Call Darkness. You can run Shadow Slash to counter humanoids if you want, although Water Jet's generally going to be pretty useful. I think Shadow Slash is probably the better option though, just because it does have the variation between 235, 352 damage. That's generally going to pay off a lot of the time, whereas Water Jet is just static damage. So the moveset here is probably Shadow Slash, Call Darkness, Crystal Prison most of the time, and he just synergizes well with other Darkness pets. For honorable mention aquatics, first up we have all of the aquatics with Rain Dance. There are several of them, but the best ones are probably the Young Sand Sifter, the Coastal Bounder, and the Bleakwater Jelly. There are a couple jellyfish, but I personally like the Bleakwater Jelly's breed. Power Speed is a solid pick. The Coastal Bounder is pretty good at countering undeads, and of course he has Rain Dance to combine with Cyclone. And the Young Sand Sifter is probably the best of these, just because he has Carpnado. It's a split AoE damage ability, so if there's only one pet remaining, it'll still do all that damage just to that one pet, which is pretty good, although since it's split damage, it will not break Decoy. All of these are Tier 1 honorable mentions, just purely based off of how good Clone Dance is. I already explained how that works, so I'm not going to reiterate that, but just a really solid combo. Also, we have the Lost Platosaur, who's a fairly new pet, and he has Rain Dance. You're generally going to run Dive with him, although you could run Tidal Wave. You just have to be very careful not to use Tidal Wave because whenever you have Cyclone out, because it will remove your own Cyclone. So that's why generally Dive is going to be a little bit better, and he's a solid Rain Dance user for sure. Also, we have the Leopard Tree Frog. Speed is the breed to go with for this guy, and you're going to run Tongue Lash, Healing Wave, or Cleansing Rain if you want the AoE heal. And then your choice of Frog Kiss or Stormflies is a really good counter for undeads because he takes weak damage from undead attacks, and he deals strong damage with Tongue Lash and Stormflies if you choose that. So, solid pet, not the best out there, but just a really good double counter to undeads. Next is Snarly. All four of the crosslists are probably worthy of mention here, but Snarly's the best breed just because with that beefy health he can survive for a pretty long time. He hits really hard since he's an HP breed, and if he needs to go first he has Surge just like all of them do, all four of the crosslists, but he's definitely a staple pet for any bleed team with Rip and Blood in the Water. If they want to swap out, then they're going to have to eat that Rip on the back line. If they want to stay in, then you can just hit them hard with Blood in the Water. So, occasionally Toothy can be a little bit better since he is a little bit faster, but generally Snarly's the one to go with just because of his higher health. Next up is the Mongoose and the Mongoose Pup. Both of these work exactly the same way, but the Mongoose is a little bit faster, so he can take advantage of Gnaw, which does extra damage if you go first. And also Survival and Dive really depend on you going first so that you can avoid damage with Dive, and then whenever you're about to die, you can just throw up Survival. If they don't have AoE, you can just swap to the back line and then rinse and repeat, do that again later on. But AoE is pretty prevalent, so that's why he's not that good in the current meta. He's still a pretty effective pet if you're trying to get your Family Brawler done. Next up is Trag the Curious. I've heard a lot of people say they think he's tier 1. I just don't have him yet, so I haven't got to try him, but I know he's pretty good at surviving for a really long time. He has a speed breed at 325 speed. It's pretty good. You can run Tongue Lash with him. You can run Eat the Fly, which is a really good heal. It heals for 300% extra if he's below 3rd health, so that's pretty good. And then you can run either Dive or Carpnado. Carpnado doesn't hit that hard since he is a speed breed, but you can run Dive if you want to survive. So he's probably tier 1. I just haven't gotten to try him out, so I'm just leaving him at an honorable mention for now. I could definitely see a case being made for him being tier 1 though. Also, there is the Spawn of Kragwa, and he's another pet with Wrath of Kragwa, which is a really solid swap out ability, like I said. The real weakness that he has is he isn't very fast. His speed is only 264, so he's generally not going to be going first. So he's not really going to be able to take advantage of his swap out ability the way the Tongue Lasher can. But he does have a heal, unlike the Tongue Lasher, so he can survive longer. He has a little bit of an awkward moveset since he has Tongue Lash, but he's so slow. You're generally going to want to run him with a Dazzling Dance user or a Temporal Anomaly, somebody who can help him go first. So if you have a way to slow the enemy team or buff your team's speed, he can definitely do very well, especially if you combine him with a Minefield user. But otherwise, he's not going to be the best, and just basically I have him on this list because of Kragwa's Wrath. It's a really solid swap-out ability that happens to do AoE. And fun fact is, if they are dodging or whatever, dodging or lift off or dive, it will still swap them out. Although, if they are using dive or I think any of those abilities that give you like an avoidance buff, then they will continue to have that avoidance buff whenever they come back in later on. So it's kind of a weird glitch. It's just a glitchy ability that hopefully will get fixed. Basically, the way the glitch works is like if they're using liftoff and then you use Kragwa's Wrath while they're up in the air, they're going to keep the buff from liftoff that makes them unattackable, even whenever they come back in later. Until they use liftoff again, of course. The last family on this list is Mechanicals. They have a really strong racial for PvP, so there are several tier 1 Mechanicals I'm going to talk about. First one being the lifelike Mechanical Frostboar. The power breed is arguably the best, but I personally prefer the speed breed because I like to put him with Murkalot and the Autumnal Sproutling and just use him as a stall pet, so the extra speed can come in handy. He's able to stall out no matter what breed he has. With Pig Out combined with Decoy, he can self-heal pretty well, and Decoy is just a really good ability for avoiding damage. He deals out reasonable damage with the speed breed with Missile, but if you're running the power breed, he's just going to hit like a truck, and really good pet. The best decoy pet in the game is still the Mechanical Pandaren Dragonling. He is a double counter to magics because, of course, he takes weak damage from magic type abilities because he's mechanical, and he deals strong damage to magics with his breath attack. His breath attack is weak to undead, so that is a little bit unfortunate for PvP since undeads are so popular, but he's still the best decoy pet in the game just purely because of Thunderbolt. Thunderbolt's a really good AoE ability. It's been nerfed in damage, but it's still really good. AoE is just a really good ability for PvP, so Mechanical Pandaren Dragonling, a solid pick for any AoE team as your cleanup pet generally. The one problem you're going to run into with these decoy pets is because the Fiendish Imp is so good, you run into it a lot, and the Fiendish Imp is a really good counter for decoy users because Immolation breaks decoy passively. So also he does strong damage to you with his elemental attacks, so you do have to be aware of that, but if you're not queuing into imps, then both of these pets can do very well in PvP. Next up is the Clockwork Gnome. He has really good damage diversity, not the best attack power by any means at 257 attack power, but he's the only pet in the game with Build Turret, which hits pretty hard, especially considering how low his attack power is. It's a really good ability, and combined with a lot of different other buffs, such as Aura of Gonk for self-healing. You can combine it with Plagued Blood, with Touch of the Animus, also for self-healing. You can combine it with abilities like Wild Magic, Black Claw, and several other damage-enhancing abilities. So, really strong ability. It's a decoy breaker. If you're blinded, it will still hit. It's just a really, really good ability. It is an item, so if they have Cleanup or Tidal Wave or Magma Wave or anything like that, it will be removed, but Grave Destruction is another one that removes items. But if they don't have any of those, it's just a really good ability for PvP. And he has good damage diversity with Railgun countering Mechanicals, Blitz to counter dragons. He isn't the best counter to the Twilight Clutch Sister because he has a speed tie, so he's not necessarily going to be able to take advantage of Blitz since it does more damage if you go first, and specifically if you have higher speed. You don't just go first with a coin flip. That's not going to help you out. But if you are faster, then Blitz is really good against dragons. But he just has really good damage diversity. He can counter several different kinds of pets out there. The other problem that he runs into with the Twilight Clutch Sister is he takes extra damage since he's mechanical from Twilight Fire. So I want to try countering the Twilight Clutch Sister with him, but Clockwork Gnome's definitely a solid pick if you're trying to get your mechanical family brawler out of the way. Up next is the knockoff Blingtron. He's one of my favorite Minefield users. His Minefield ability is called Booby Trap Presence, just like the Rot Middle Helper's Minefield. And generally the moveset you're going to run with this guy is Make It Rain, Booby Trap Presence, and then Inflation. Although if you think you're going to go faster, you can run Smack That. But generally I prefer Inflation. You can combine it with Dots, with Immolation, those types of abilities, even Haunt to give a Shatter Defenses debuff. And it also is going to take advantage of the fact that generally they're not going to want to swap out with your Minefield down, so you can throw down your Make It Rain, and then you can buff that dot damage with Inflation. If you're able to survive for another Make It Rain, that's going to hit really, really, really hard. And just a really fun pet. He doesn't have any damage diversity, which kind of hinders him. Since he is really, really weak to elementals, you're kind of limited to pairing him with a pet that has aquatic damage, or else you're just going to be screwed if you queue into elementals. But a really fun pet. Not the fastest at 289, just like the Clockwork Gnome, but it's still pretty respectable speed. And he has really good health too. Next up is the Stone Grinder. He fits in very well with bleed teams, with trap teams, with AoE teams. He has several different teams that he can do well with. One in particular is Own Grinders with the Curious Wolvar Pup, Graves, and then of course Stone Grinder. He has really good synergy with these pets because of his Wood Chipper. He is a great bleed pet, so you can throw out that bleed and then use another pet with Maul or Blood in the Water. He has Thunderbolt, so that's really good AoE ability. And then he has Cleanup, which if you throw out your Snap Trap and then swap to the Stone Grinder and use Cleanup, it will activate the trap, it'll remove it, and stun the enemy pet, which is really good, especially if you're faster. He also has really good damage diversity, so all of his moves cover his weaknesses. So for example, Wood Chipper is strong versus critters, but weak versus flyers. That weakness to flyers is no problem though, because Cleanup is strong versus flyers since it's a magic attack. Cleanup, however, is weak to mechanicals, but no problem. Thunderbolt is elemental damage, so you're strong versus mechanicals. And Thunderbolt is elemental damage, so it's weak versus critters. Well, no problem. Like I said earlier, Wood Chipper is a bleed, so it's going to be very good against critters. So he has really good coverage as far as damage types go. That makes him relatively difficult to counter. Also, he's a particularly good pet for getting your family brawler done because he has Rebuild. So it's an AoE heal that's only going to work with other mechanical allies, but since you're running 3 mechanicals, that's no problem. You do have to give up Cleanup for that, which is kind of sad because that's a really good utility ability. But solid tier 1 pet for sure. He works in a lot of different types of teams. Up next we have the Warbot, who is arguably the best Minefield user in the game. Minefield, it's really hard for him because of his high attack power. He's able to stall out for a really long time with extra plating, and then he just hits like a truck with missile. The one downside to him is like the knockoff Blingtron, he doesn't have any damage diversity, so if you queue into elementals, he's kind of worthless. So you generally are going to want to run him with a pet that has good aquatic damage, like the Purple Puffer, but if they don't have an elemental to soak that Minefield, it hits really, really hard. And when you pair the Warbot with a Fiendish Imp, you can set off your own Minefield by forcing them to swap out. And that's one of the best combos in the game for sure. You can pretty much carry any third pet with that combo alone. Next we have the Iron Starlet. He has several breeds available, my personal favorite being the Power breed, although the HH is definitely an acceptable breed and sometimes can do better since he can survive for longer. And you already hit so hard with your one-shot combo with wind up, supercharge into a wind up, that the HH is definitely a solid pick, although the power does hit a little bit harder, which can help with Powerball to actually land kills. Powerball is just a really good ability, like I explained with the Vengeful Porky Pet, unless they can purge it with the Ravenous Prideling, which is kind of an odd, very unique counter. You're not going to see very often. Then you are going to be able to keep that speed buff for the rest of the game, even if you swap out and you come back in later. So Powerball's really good when you consider that he's not very fast. So generally, if you try to go for like a wind up into a supercharge, if you're slower, your enemy's just going to go for a dodge or a stun or something to avoid the attack. But if you can Powerball a couple times, then you're going to be faster, and it's going to be much harder for them to avoid your one-shot. He's one of the hardest hitting one-shot pets in the game. Unless they have a magic pet or an elemental to soak it, you're going to one-shot almost everything with that combo. And even elementals still take a ton of damage from the wind-up supercharge combo. Next up is the Black Hughes Bombling. On his own, he is a tier 1 pet, the power breed, hitting really hard. Generally, you're going to run Burn and Flame Jet to counter other mechanicals. He just hits really hard. Zap isn't a half bad option, though. But what's really overpowered about him is when you combine him with Merkalot. His Armageddon is going to hit for about 722 to each of the enemy pets, and if it's a beast pet, you're going to take over 1,000 damage. So unless you queue into elementals, that's just ridiculous AoE pressure. There's really nothing you can do about it, and it's really hard to counter. It's super strong. So he hits like a truck, and when you combine him with Merkalot, tier 0 combination for sure. Lastly, we have Little XT and Landro's Little XT. They both work exactly the same way. The Personal World Destroyer is kind of the poor man's version of it, but the real difference between the Personal World Destroyer with Supercharge and Quake is Supercharge only buffs your next attack, and Quake kind of deals its damage in 3 different attacks. It does the frontline damage, and then it does the 2 backline attacks. So if you Supercharge, it's only going to buff the damage of the frontline attack from the very first Quake, which isn't very good. So Little XT, on the other hand, can run Heartbroken, where as long as you take damage, which is often unavoidable by your opponent, if they have like Immolation or a dot on you, for example, or even Cyclone out, that has a chance to hit you and there's nothing they can do about it, then it'll make you have a 100% damage buff for 2 rounds, and your Tympanic Tantrum is going to do a crap ton of AoE pressure. So really good AoE pet. He fits in pretty well with any AoE team. I don't happen to have one to show it off, but just a really good pet. Both of them work exactly the same way. First on the list for honorable mention mechanicals is the Cogblade Raptor. He's able to outspeed his opponent very easily with Screech or Overtune, whichever you choose. So the speed breed isn't necessary, but it's the one that I like. And his real combo is Exposed Wounds with Batter. That's going to be able to deal quite a bit of damage. Batter does extra damage if you go first, so that has good synergy with Screech or Overtune, whichever you choose. I personally think Screech is a little better. It gives you some damage variety, and it also lasts for 4 turns, although it is dodgeable. It doesn't have a cooldown though, so I think that it's probably the better option. So Batter plus Exposed Wounds does a lot of damage. It's not the best combination in PvP because generally whenever your opponent sees that they have Exposed Wounds on them, they're just going to swap out, and you're not going to be able to get the full benefit out of Exposed Wounds. But if they only have 1 pet left, they don't have that luxury, and so he's a pretty solid cleanup pet. Not the best, like I said, but he synergizes very nicely with dot pets like Immolation users or Poison Fang. Those kind of bleeds, those kind of abilities will work nicely with Exposed Wounds. Next on the list is Little Bling. He doesn't have a whole lot of damage variety unless you go for Blingtron Gift Package, but I prefer extra plating just to be a little tankier. Nothing wrong with Blingtron Gift Package, it's just a little bit RNG for my taste. But since he's so fast, you can run Smack That. It works just like Alpha Strike, does extra damage if you go first. And then Make It Rain works like a Decoy Breaker, the same way as Bone Barrage does. So he just has a really nice moveset. Very weak to elementals for sure, since most of the time you're just going to have mechanical damage, but a solid mechanical for sure. Really good in PvE, definitely good at taking out beast tamer pets, but he's solid in PvP, nothing to sneeze at. Next up is the Alarmo dog, and he's on the list just because of Minefield. Minefield's really strong in PvP, but he also has a decoy breaker called Alert, which just does its damage in 3 different chunks, similar to Blessed Hammer from Merkalot and Plot Twist from the Rascalbot, and so that's pretty useful utility ability. He has Overtune, which you can use to be faster, and then you could go for Batter if you want, but I personally prefer Alert just so that you have that decoy breaker. And doesn't have any damage variety, which is kind of a bummer. Also, he doesn't hit that hard, so he's not the best Minefield user in the game, but he is pretty cool that he has Minefield and a decoy breaker, so I thought he was worth a mention, although he's probably not a solid tier 1 pet. Next on the list is the Ancient Nest Guardian. He has a really good one-shot combo. It's not the best in the world, but combining Entangling Roots plus Feathered Frenzy does a lot of damage. It also gives you a damage buff for a turn, so you can hit pretty hard with your Metal Fist and take out beasts pretty well. He's pretty slow, and he doesn't have the highest attack power, but he has really good health, so he can survive for a really long time, and his attack power doesn't really matter since he has that really strong combination with Entangling Roots and Feathered Frenzy. If they're not able to dodge that, it's going to root them, and it's just going to hit them really hard. So he's just on this list for that one little combination. Next up is Skybow. He's here for Decoy. Decoy is just a really good ability. His other moves aren't that impressive. His Flamethrower isn't a bad dot. Hits for about as hard as a basic attack and then applies a dot for 2 turns, so he's a fun pet to throw with Conflagrate pets like the Silver Dragonhawk Hatchling. And then Sticky Grenade's a pretty good ability. It doesn't deal damage until the end of 3 turns, and it is counted as a dot, so if you throw it on an aquatic pet, it is going to only do half damage, so that's kind of a bummer. But the plus side is it can't be dodged, so if they try to use a dodge or an ethereal or something, or they try to cleanse it, actually if they try to cleanse it, then it's going to immediately activate and hit them, so there's no way to avoid it. You do have to be careful though. If you throw out your Sticky Grenade and then your opponent swaps and then they swap back in, and you throw up the Sticky Grenade again to try to throw it on the second pet, it'll just refresh the duration. So you have to be careful not to let that happen. Not the best pet in the world with Decoy, but Decoy is just so good that I figured he was worth mentioning. And he has 2 breeds. Both of them are pretty good. I like the Speed breed, but the Power breed can hit a little bit harder, so either one is a solid pet for PvP. Next we have the Gearspring Hopper. He's the only mechanical pet in the game with a trap ability. He has Snap Trap, and the real reason he isn't tier 1, even though he has Snap Trap, which is such a good ability, is his breed's kind of garbage. He doesn't hit very hard and his speed's really low, so he's not able to take advantage of Tongue Lash, which means unless you have a Dazzling Dance user to pair with him, you're probably going to want to run Frog Kiss and Sticky Grenade. He's a bad pet, but if you can pair him with a Dazzling Dance user, he should do really well. If you run Tongue Lash, he can take advantage of Interrupting Jolt as long as he's faster, and then Snap Trap is just such a good ability. I figured he was worth mentioning because he is the only mechanical pet in the game with it. So looks like a fun pet. I haven't gotten to try him out myself, and it might turn out that his extra health with his health breed turns out to be pretty useful, because he might be able to survive longer, throw out more traps, which can really mess with your opponent. But I personally think that the harder hitting trap users are going to be better off than this guy. He still looks like a pretty good pet though. And lastly, I'd like to talk about the rebuilt Mechanical Spider. This guy looks really good. His speed's really good. He has 349 speed, so it's going to outspeed most pets. His health is a little bit low, and his attack power is a little low, but he has Flurry, which is a decoy breaker like I've said. He has Smoke Cloud, which is a 4-round cooldown dodge, and then generally you're going to want to run Explode, which is kind of a bummer. Your other option is Spiderling Swarm, and if you're running Smoke Cloud, you're not going to have Sticky Web, so you're not going to be able to get the double damage from Spiderling Swarm since you don't have a web. But he just looks like he has a really good moveset to pair with his high speed. Flurry does extra damage if you go first. It's just a really good ability for PvP. Dodge is a really good ability, and especially if you're faster, which he's almost always going to be. I don't really think he's a tier 1 pet just because he doesn't hit very hard, and you are kind of locked into Explode, which isn't that great. Fun fact is Explode will go through Crouch. It doesn't go through Dodge, so if they dodge it, then you're just going to kill yourself. That's no good. But if they have Crouch up, it will still deal full damage, which is 40% of your health. Unfortunately, you don't have that much health, so can't really take advantage of that. But having high speed is really nice with an Explode pet, because a lot of the time with pets like the Blackfuse Bombling, if you try to wait until your mechanical racial to use your Explode or your Armageddon, often you're going to die. They're going to kill you off before you get that explosion off. So having extra speed can actually be pretty nice, even though your health isn't all that good to take advantage of Explode. The real problem with Explode, though, is that kind of doesn't allow him to be a good cleanup pet, since if you kill yourself and you're the last pet left, then it's just going to be a tie at best, which I guess is fun, but a tie doesn't help anybody out. It doesn't give anybody a win, so a fun pet for sure. I'm going to have to try him out. I don't have him yet, but I'd like to see him in action. I think he could do pretty well with his breed combined with his moveset. Just definitely a pet worth mentioning. So I hope y'all enjoyed the video. If you can think of any pets that I might have missed, feel free to let me know. And if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Also, I'll leave a list of all of the add-ons that I use for pet battles in the description.